If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21. What do we have here? Axel's smirk widened as he gazed at Colonel Watts, who sat handcuffed across from him at the table. You tried your best, Colonel, I'll give you that. But when matched up against me, it's best to just lay down your weapons and give up, stated Axel. The Colonel's eyes flashed with an undeniable fierceness. If you think you have won the war, then you are quite mistaken, son, said Colonel Watts. Axel wasn't fond of being referred to as son. Despite being physically younger, he had lived over 40 years when you combined his previous life with his current one, making him mentally older than the person calling him son. You will address me as Admiral, Axel stated sternly as he stared at the Colonel. The rank of Colonel was equal to the rank of Captain, so being a 2-star Admiral, Axel outranked him. Admiral. The Colonel rolled the word around his mouth like a sour candy, before spitting it out with palpable disdain. You may have your titles and influence, but you will never be able to understand the reason behind the insurrection. Axel shook his head as he repeated, I do understand the reason, but causing the deaths of millions of lives during this insurrection does not help your case. In fact, I find the entire reason for the insurrection to be illogical. Wanting control over the outer colonies because of their distance from the inner colonies and Earth is not a valid enough reason for independence. Valid or not, you can't expect us to bow down to the chains of the Earth government willingly, Watts shot back, his cuffed hands tightening into fists on the table. The outer colonies are not mere specks of dust to be dominated and drained of their resources. Their homes, Admiral. Their livelihoods. Axel shook his head in disappointment. Your illogical thinking is the reason why you are losing this war against the UNSC. You lack real motivation, which is why people have turned their backs on you so quickly. The outer colonies used to sympathize with you, but your resorting to violence has cost you their support, Axel stated with a grim tone. But before Colonel Watts could answer, Axel put his hand up, signaling him to speak no more. You will be transported back to Earth, where you will be trialed for your crimes. In the meantime, I will round up the rest of your kind and put an end to this armed conflict, stated Axel. With that, 2 MCUs came in and carried Colonel Watts back to his prison cell. As he was being carried out, Colonel Watts didn't try to resist, since it was useless, but also because he had accepted his fate. Would he take back what he had done so far? No, and he still believed that the outer colonies should be free from the central government's control. But for now, all he could do was to wait for his trial and hope that the other groups will be able to defeat Axel. Once Colonel Watts was carried out, Axel left the room shortly after and headed towards his office within the command building. He had one last thing to do before he left the planet. And everything he needed was right on his computer. He had compiled tons of information on Attorney General Johnston which could justify his arrest. Over the weeks, the intelligence specialists within the command center had tapped into and listened to communications between the United Rebel Front and even communications from another planet in the outer colonies. Using this information, Axel had the justification to arrest Johnston and get rid of the strong insurrectionist influence on Eridanus II. He sat behind the cold metal desk in his darkened office, a singular lamp illuminating the thick stack of incriminating evidence. Axel flipped open his laptop, its glow washing over his face. With swift precision, he began to select and arrange top-secret documents, voice recordings, and video clips into an organized file. The Morse-coded chatter of Johnston with insurrectionist leaders discussing illegal deals, plans for explosives, and orchestrated attacks rang through his quiet office. A video clip showed Johnston shaking hands with one of the most wanted terrorists in the system. Axel had enough proof now to link Johnston directly to the rebellion. He saved the file and would send it later after he arrested Johnston. A few short moments after saving the files into a folder, a knock was heard at his door. Admiral, we are ready to go, announced Commander Talia from the other side of the door. I'll be there in just a moment, responded Axel. He stood up from his desk and locked his computer. He already had his combat uniform on, so he walked directly to the door and followed Talia to the top of the building, where a small landing platform was created for sending to teams to conduct operations across the planet. Once he reached the Pelican, one of the squad leaders had approached him and saluted. Axel returned the salute. Report, stated Axel. Admiral, we have surrounded the Attorney General's office and have cut off all escape routes leading to and from the building. A few guards have already surrendered, but those most loyal to him had remained inside and barricaded themselves with hostages, reported the squad leader. And now you are having a standoff with them, asked Axel. Yes sir, replied the squad leader. All right then, let's go, said Axel as he boarded the Pelican, followed by Commander Talia and the squad leader. A few minutes later and they had arrived in front of the Attorney General's office building, which was already surrounded by dozens of UNSC Marines and had 2 Falcons hovering overhead provided aerial observation. Once the Pelican landed, Axel was taken the Attorney General's office where Johnston was held up. As they reached the floor, Axel could hear shouting which sounded like Johnston arguing with one of the UNSC squad leaders. Axel was taken down the hallway until he got to the source of the yelling. Standing outside the door to Johnston's office, Axel could hear the muffled shouts of the Attorney General interlaced with calm, resolute responses from squad leader Davis. "I don't give a damn about your warrant, Davis. You soil my office with your presence." Johnston's voice boomed, rattling the reinforced steel door. "Mr. Johnston," Axel said smoothly as he pushed open the door and stepped inside without waiting for a response. Framed in the dim glow of an antique brass lamp, Johnston shot to his feet, his face twisted in outrage. Beside him was Davis, standing rigid but unflinching under Johnston's furious tirade. Axel studied the room carefully, noting a handful of defiant-looking men guarding a group of scared hostages huddled in the corner. They were outnumbered by UNSC Marines but were fortified behind makeshift barricades and armed. "Admiral Axel," Johnston growled, taking in Axel's uniform with an evident sneer. He tossed an accusing look towards Davis, who merely gave a single nod in return. "I see you've been informed," Axel said coolly, returning his gaze to Johnston. "You are under arrest for treason against the United Nations Space Corps and its allies, Mr. Johnston." Johnston's angry scowl morphed into outright disbelief. "Treason? This is preposterous. I have done nothing but serve my people." "You served yourself more than anyone else," Axel retorted quietly. His eyes flickered towards the terrified hostages and then back to Johnston. "Think about their lives before you do anything reckless." Axel observed the men on Johnston's side and could tell that they were scared and probably feared for their lives. The soldiers' allegiance to Johnston was strong, but in the face of being outnumbered and outgunned, that loyalty was as fragile as a thin piece of glass that could be easily shattered. "I did what was right, siding with the insurrectionists gave me power and kept the people in line," stated Johnston. "And it kept my pockets full, as long as they were allowed to do what they wanted to, I would keep getting paid," continued Johnston. Axel's response was filled with disappointment. "So you were never truly invested in the people, only in the money," he stated. Johnston smiled. "That's correct, Admiral, and I have no intention of getting put on trial," yelled Johnston as he reached for his weapon. But as he did this, the window behind him had shattered and 5 MCUs appeared behind Johnston and his group. Johnston, who was distracted by the MCUs, didn't notice Axel draw his pistol and point it at him. Now, with his weapon pointed at Johnston, Axel shot 4 bullets, 2 landing in his arm holding the weapon and another 2 was aimed at his hand, but because of Johnston movement Axel had missed. Johnston had dropped his weapon as he was shot in his arm while the MCUs moved in for the arrest and the Marines moved in towards the hostages in a coordinated manner. But seeing Johnston go down, the remaining guards had gave up and dropped their weapons. "Good shots, Admiral," said the squad leader. "Thank you," replied Axel as he holstered his pistol and turned towards Commander Talia, who was standing at the door. "Make sure these people get back safely and secure the building until tomorrow," ordered Axel. "Aye, sir," Commander Talia said as she began to issue orders to the Marines while Axel left the building and returned back to the command center. He would wait a few days before he gathered all of the residents up and announce the changes to leadership and their crimes. Once that was done, then he would head to his next target. Chapter 22. With the arrest of Attorney General Johnston, Axel had rid the planet of the most influential insurrectionists' leaders, leaving the rest to either go into hiding or try to return back to living a normal life under the unified Earth government. No matter what they decided to do, they now had no central leadership or help from the outside. Axel assumed most of the insurrectionists were captured or killed when he raided the final base and captured Colonel Watts. While there would still be those who didn't like the UEG or the UNSC, there was nothing that could be done about that. But with the fall of the United Rebel Front, those who disliked the UEG would have to live with their failure. After arresting Attorney General Johnston, Axel had contacted Admiral Ross to report his success on Eridanus II. "Sir, as the report says, Colonel Watts is in custody alongside Attorney General Johnston, who was abusing his power and allowing the insurrectionists to do whatever they wanted. And with them gone, the insurrectionists won't be able to cause problem on Eridanus II for a while," stated Axel. Admiral Ross looked over the report, which had files attached to it showing evidence of both Colonel Watts and Attorney General Johnston's association with the insurrectionists. "Good job, Admiral. I will process this report and the 2 of them will be trialed. In the meantime, I will let you get back to it as I know you have a lot of work to do," said Admiral Ross. Axel nodded as the call ended. Admiral Ross probably had a lot of work to do as well because of the significant amount of evidence that Axel presented to him to convict Colonel Watts and Johnston. He was glad that he didn't have to spend that much time talking since he did have things to do. Over the course of the next 5 days, Axel had spent much time ensuring the stability of the planet until a new Attorney General arrived. Colonel Watts and Johnston were already on a transport back to Earth where they would face a trial for all of their crimes. On the 5th day the new Attorney General had arrived and Axel had handed over control of the planet to him. Axel addressed the people of Eridanus II to ensure that they were now safe from the threat of the insurrectionists and to also boost his reputation and fame among the people of the outer colonies. He did a small speech which was attended by thousands and broadcasted across the planet to the others, which was well received by the population. Once the speech was over, Axel didn't waste any time and had left for his ship, which was docked at the spaceport above the planet. The building, which was transformed into a command building, was already returned back to normal as the Marines and other specialists returned back to the battle group. As his ship ascended, Axel had one last view of Eridanus II from his cockpit. He had succeeded in taking down the first insurrection group and now he was on to deal with the rest. Transmissions from Earth arrived frequently now, updates about Colonel Watts and Johnston's trial. The evidence presented was damning and indisputable, both were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to imprisonment for life. Meanwhile, Axel was on board his ship as the specialists were busy gathering information on the whereabouts of the next group. The United Rebel Front was an organization that had been active on Eridanus II for years, so dealing with them wouldn't take long. But the other groups were different, as some of them were active on multiple worlds. And some of them were confused for pirates. There was a second group active in the Eridanus system called the Freedom and Liberation Party, which were a much higher threat than the United Rebel Front because of their past actions. In 2511 a terrorist within the party detonated a commercial nuclear explosive, used in asteroid mining, inside the haven Arcologi, killing 2 million people and injuring a further 8.3 million. After the attack they demanded the CMA withdraw from Eridanus. The CMA was the colonial military administration founded in 2310 as the military body for the CAA, or Colonial Administration Authority. Since the terrorist attack in 2511 the Freedom and Liberation Party had been lying low and has not been active for the past 5 years. Though Axel knew this wasn't true since the CMA had a lot of traitors within the administration. That's how the insurrectionists were getting their weapons and such, because of the traitors within the CMA. And now some members of the CMA were probably hiding any activity related to the Freedom and Liberation Party. Axel had always known that the fight against the insurrectionists wasn't solely waged on open battlefields or in clandestine hideouts, but within the deep corridors of political power and influence as well. After all, Johnston wasn't the first high-ranking official to be found in bed with insurrectionists. Unraveling this network, as vast and complex as it seemed, was just a part of his mission now. So his first task was to head to the planet Mammary and see if the Freedom and Liberation Party is still active or if they find information relating to the whereabouts of one of their hideouts. Mammary was in the Eridanus system, so it wouldn't take long to warp to the planet. Mammary was known for its bitter cold climate and harsh living conditions. It was an ideal location for rebels to go into hiding, far from the watchful eye of the UEG and the UNSC. The Freedom and Liberation Party might be lying low, but they wouldn't be for much longer if Axel had his way. Once the battle group arrived above Mammary, Axel had begun to hack into the CMA's network to gather any hidden information on insurrection activity. It was a simple task, and within minutes he had access to their network and started to look through it. The ship's sophisticated AI, Avia, worked tirelessly alongside Axel to decipher coordinates, encrypted communications, and various other data points that could potentially reveal the location of the insurrectionists. Later on, Axel would create his own AI to replace Avia. Axel's gaze was fixed on his hollow screen as he flicked through data logs and classified reports. The silence in the bridge was palpable, save for the occasional murmur of commands from Axel to Avia. Avia, Axel finally broke his concentration. Cross-reference these coordinates with recent ship movements in this quadrant. Affirmative, Admiral. Avia responded. As Avia said about her task, Axel leaned back in his command chair and folded his arms over his chest, waiting for Avia to finish her task. He would do it himself, but there were hundreds of thousands of digital paperwork which had to go through, and he didn't have the time for that, as it would take weeks. But Avia could do it in a couple of hours since she was an AI, and unlike humans she wasn't restricted when it came to analyzing hundreds of thousands of digital paperwork. Minutes turned into hours as Avia sifted through endless amounts of digital paperwork. Consequently, patterns began to emerge: suspicious SAT-NAV plotting and an unusual amount of traffic around a small moon orbiting Mammary. Admiral, Avia soon intoned, it seems there is a significant increase in unidentified ship activity around one of Memory's moons. The pattern suggests possible insurrectionist activity. Prepare Battle Group Tango for a jump, Axel ordered crisply, standing from his seat. Set course for those coordinates. Engage at full speed. Affirmative, Admiral, Avia instantly confirmed, her voice echoing in the quiet bridge. The command center was soon a flurry of activity as Axel's orders were relayed. Crewmen and officers darted around, initiating protocols and preparing the battle group for warp jump. Within moments, Battle Group Tango was warping towards the small moon orbiting Memory at full speed. The Freedom and Liberation Party had been hiding for years, but now that Axel was here there was nowhere that they could hide. After about 5 minutes the ship had exited warp speed and in front of them stood the moon orbiting Memory. Admiral, I am picking up 3 frigate-sized vessels in orbit of the planet and a small signal transmission from the surface of the moon, reported Avia. Acknowledged, Avia, Axel said, standing at the panoramic bridge window. The battle group had exited warp a large distance from the moon to give them time to get prepared for combat should they need to and to not get caught in the planet's gravitational pull as soon as they exited warp speed. Initiate tactical protocols and ready our forces for a potential engagement. And trace that signal. Ordered Axel. Affirmative, Admiral. Responded Avia. Axel wasn't aware of any UNSC vessels operating near the moon, which means that they must be captured UNSC vessels by the insurrectionists. If that's the case, then they may have just found the Freedom and Liberation Party. The real question is, how long have they been secretly operating under the UNSC's radar? Chapter 23. The 2 Gorgon-class heavy destroyers was at the forefront of the battle group, with the Epic-class heavy carrier at the rear and the cruiser in the middle to support the 2 heavy destroyers. As they approached the 3 frigates they kept trying to contact them, but they didn't respond. That's when a small group of fighters from the moon was spotted rapidly approaching the battle group. Admiral, there is 14 fighter-class craft coming from the moon, reported Avia. Copy that, launch all fighters and open fire on those 3 frigates, ordered Axel. There was no need to waste time since it was clear that they were the enemy. In the hangar bay of the carrier various fighter pilots rushed to their respective fighters as the voice over the intercom gave out orders. Inside the bay, engines whirred and roared to life. The air was rife with tension as pilots donned their helmets and prepared for the battle ahead. Blue Squadron, you're up, the launch officer's voice echoed through each cockpit. A chorus of acknowledgements came over the comms. Axel watched from the bridge as the first wave of fighters launched from the Leviathan's gaping base. Each squadron consisted of 12 fighters and the Leviathan could carry up to 24 fighters plus a few more depending on how much space they have left in the hangars. The fighters that the insurrectionists were using were outdated fighters which they probably acquired from companies selling off old equipment or from the CMA who gave them old technology to get rid of it and not draw too much attention. As they rushed to meet their foes, the main batteries of the destroyers opened fire on the insurrectionist frigates. There was no need for the Mac cannon as of yet since it was just 3 frigates which they could deal with no problem. Status report, Axel demanded. Fighters have engaged enemy. First volley has hit enemy frigates, one of them has been disabled and the first 2 have returned fire, Avia reported. Keep firing at the frigates and launch the second wave, Axel ordered. The hangar doors opened and the second squad of fighters flew out to join the first squad. As the second wave took flight, a low hum filled the bridge as they watched the scene unfold. The outdated enemy fighters were quickly getting overwhelmed by the superior UNSC forces. Admiral, second wave is in formation with Blue Squadron, came the voice of Lieutenant Hayes, squadron leader of the second wave. Copy that, Lieutenant. Proceed with attack formation Delta. Called out Axel. An affirmative hummed over the communication channel as the 2 squadrons switched to their attack formation. Out in front, the Gorgon-class destroyers continued their relentless fire on the insurrectionist frigates. As the weapons tore through frigates, one of them blew up from overwhelming firepower. The remaining enemy frigate tried to turn around and escape the battle, but a well-placed shot at its engines prevented that from happening. All targets are disabled or destroyed, Avia reported after a while, no losses on our side. Good, Axel said, relief lining his tone. Recall all fighters and prepare boarding teams. Aye, sir. Avia replied. Marines were dispatched to the ship with orders to apprehend any surviving rebels from the 2 frigates. Unfortunately, only one of the enemy ships was destroyed, but it was the result of their own choices. At the same time, Axel had dispatched a small marine detachment to the surface of the moon where the signal was detected from. Upon arrival, the Marines were fired upon by insurrection soldiers within the base. The Marines returned fire, and with the support from Falcons and other air support, the insurrection base had fell shortly after. Many of the insurrectionists had gave up, and those that were injured were treated for their wounds and then arrested once they were out of critical condition. Then Marines had searched the base and had brought back some valuable data from facility. From the information collected, the base that they attacked was the Freedom and Liberation Party's main base across the outer colonies. But it was not the only one. Through analysis of the found data, Axel had discovered various other locations across the system which were either hidden bases, assets, or allies of the Freedom and Liberation Party. Using this information, Axel had conducted a large operation to shut down these bases while also patrolling systems to counter piracy and combat the other groups of the insurrection. The morale amongst the battle group was high after the first 2 victories over the insurrectionists, and as Axel continued to win victory after victory throughout the passing months, the morale continued to be high. The months had turned into a grueling 2 years which Axel had spent conducting a lot of operations against the insurrectionists and showcasing his ability as an admiral. His success had shut up a few politicians and high-ranking members of the UNSC who initially opposed his promotion to admiral and his assignment to the outer colonies. His victories brought him a lot of fame and support throughout the UNSC, and made him even more popular within the outer colonies. Axel's victories over the insurrectionists were swift and sure. A strategic genius, he carried the weight of his rank and responsibilities with grace and determination, never allowing the darkness of war to consume his spirit. He had become a popular figure within the outer colonies amongst both the civilians and the insurrectionists. As his victories piled up, more and more time was spent simply patrolling the outer colonies as most of the insurrection activity had died down. Numerous groups were destroyed, preventing more groups from rising up, and thousands of people were captured and trialed. The victories were not without their cost, however. Lives were lost on both sides. Axel blamed their deaths on the insurrectionists who have already claimed millions of innocent lives. He stated that the soldiers fought for what they believed in and were the true heroes. Of course, this was all just a political and public image move made by Axel to increase his popularity. But he did have sympathy for the families of the lost soldiers, but he knew that they were not the first, nor would they be the last ones to die. Chapter 24. A/N, check out the official Discord with the posted link down below. And don't hesitate to post suggestions for characters, ships, weapons, and anything else so that I can potentially add it to the story. Discord link. Current date, January 22, 2521. Axel was now entering the final 6 months of his deployment and would soon return back to his position as the head of ONI Section 3. So far he has achieved quite a lot in the outer colonies. Thousands of insurrectionists from various groups were captured and transported back to the inner colonies to be trialed, and numerous groups were either destroyed or too weak to cause any more major problems. Groups such as the United Rebel Front and the Freedom and Liberation Party had lost its central leadership, causing the group to basically be disbanded until someone tries and unite them again. Some groups were already destroyed by the UNSC before Axel was deployed to the outer colonies, such as the Secessionist Union. The Secessionist Union, also referred to as the People's Occupation Government, was disbanded in 2502 after its leader, Gerald Mulkey Ander, was assassinated by Corporal Avery Johnson during Operation Kaleidoscope. Members of the Colonial Military Administration, CMA, were also found and arrested for working with the insurrectionists. This was already something that Fleetcom had suspected from the CMA, as the insurrectionists always found ways to get weapons, coordinate attacks on UNSC bases, and avoid the UNSC at times. This was also something that Axel utilized in his attacks on the insurrectionists. He would tell the CMA that he was planning an operation in one place to draw out the traitors from within the CMA and confuse the insurrectionists when the planned attack did not happen. Axel was not just a brute force of military power, he was a strategist, a chess player in the grand game of interstellar politics and warfare. And for the remaining 6 months, Axel would spend most of it patrolling the outer colonies' systems and ensuring stability across each planet. The 2 frigates which he had disabled during a skirmish with insurrection forces in his first year had been completely repaired and crewed with some new recruits who had finished their training. The frigates were stationed at Algal because of their lack of warp drives. But after they were equipped with them, they had joined up with the battle group over 4 months ago. Within the battle group's formation, the 2 frigates were placed on each side of the Leviathan, with the cruiser in the front and the 2 destroyers in front of the cruisers. In a normal battle, the 2 destroyers would be the first ones to engage the enemy ships, with the cruiser behind them for long-range support. The carrier is the command ship and should naturally be protected, so it would remain behind the front-line ships and launch fighters to combat the enemy fighters and bombers to combat the enemy ships. The 2 frigates would serve as a sort of protective cover in case an ambush happens and the enemy try to go after the carrier. They would also take on a skirmish role and harass enemy ships while they are distracted by the frontline ships. This military intelligence and strategic positioning were crucial to Axel's success in destabilizing the insurrectionist forces. He is a firm believer in the proverb, "Know thy enemy," and attributed much of his victories to understanding the insurrectionists' tactics and countering them effectively. Axel was well aware that his strategy might need to change swiftly as the situation evolved. Of course, they did not always fly in a battle group. Sometimes the two frigates acted as an extension of his eyes and ears in space, frequently dispatched to patrol areas that may be vulnerable or to pursue leads on insurrectionist activities. These 6 months won't be just about patrolling and ensuring stability across each planet. Axel planned to cut off any chances of insurrectionist resurgence at its roots. He intended on focusing his attention on identifying potential sources of future threats, sympathizer networks within the colonies, discrepancies in supply chains which might indicate smuggling activities supporting the remaining rebels, anything that could lead him closer to comprehensively eliminating this threat to the UNSC. Meanwhile, Hammer, who is in charge of the 1st Robotic Battalion, had been working within the inner colonies dealing with the small insurrectionists groups which were present there. The 1st Robotic Battalion was already a well-known battalion and had even been on the news showcasing the most recent human inventions. But there was also another group gaining popularity as well. Miss Rye Armory, who had recently created its own version of the MCU, was gaining popularity. They had created cheaper version of the MCUs which could be mass-produced. The only problem was the fact that they were in no way superior to that of the MCUs. While they had the advantage because they were robotic units, they still stood no chance against Axel's MCUs. Against the insurrectionists, sure, they would be able to overwhelm them thanks to the AI programming which the Miss Rye Armory added to them, but they were not on the same level as the AI for the MCUs. But they had proved that they can fight against the insurrectionists, and as such had gained a contract from the UNSC to mass-produce them in the thousands to gain better control of the outer colonies with them. The move had been met with a flurry of protests from smaller defense firms, who saw it as the establishment tightening its monopoly on the armaments sector, yet it was unavoidable. Miss Rye Armory had captured the spirit of the moment and was riding a wave of popularity and success. This wasn't something that Axel needed to worry about, since it would only be adding to the list of the UNSC worst decisions when it came to armaments. Politically, he may have been affected a little, since in the future he knew that his MCUs would probably stop receiving funding, but it was nothing that would cause long-term damage. In fact, the political damage was probably insignificant. The contract was probably orchestrated by those high-ranking officers who want to limit his success and political influence, not knowing that in the long run they would only be hurting the UNSC. In the meantime, the Leviathan continued its vigilant patrol in the outer colonies for the remaining 6 months until it was time for Axel to return back to Algal, and where he would resume supervising the Spartan program. Chapter 25. 6 months later, July 25, 2521, Axel was officially done with his mission in the outer colonies and was now en route back to Algal. His mission in the outer colonies was a huge success to his position as a 2-star admiral and Admiral's Ross position as the chairman of the UNSC. But his time was slowly coming to an end, since the president of the Unified Earth Government, UEG, was getting a lot of complaints from a few high-ranking admirals about Admiral Ross, the chairman of the UNSC. And it was due to his quick success and his early promotions that got the attention of the president. Adding on the complaints from other admirals, high-ranking officials, and members of the cabinet, President Michael Moore couldn't just sit back and allow Admiral Ross to keep causing dissent within the UNSC ranks. And as president of the UEG, President Moore had the power to do something about it, since the UNSC was subordinate to the UEG. Right now, President Moore was sitting in his office with the Secretary of Defense and the Minister of Information. Mr. President, Admiral Ross caused a lot of problems with his forced promotions of Admiral Woods, stated the Secretary of Defense Anthony Hart. While I have no doubts about Admiral Woods' capabilities, some are unhappy with the speed at which he has risen through the ranks. Traditionally, it takes years of service and notable achievements to attain his current position. This has caused consternation among fellow high-ranking admirals, who believe that Admiral Ross is not adhering to the Navy's long-standing tradition of earning one's rank. President Moore nodded his head, understanding that on one hand Admiral Woods has proven to be capable, especially with his recent completion of his assignment in the outer colonies, which has been a huge success to the UEG to keep those colonies under control. On the other hand, the high-ranking admirals are probably a little upset that someone younger than them might surpass them in rank, and that Admiral Ross is not sticking to naval tradition. Alyssa Wilson, the Minister of Information, took advantage of the few seconds of silence to speak her opinion. Mr. President, I must say that this Admiral Axel is a prodigy amongst prodigies who could very well push humanity to the next level if given enough power. Plus he has quite the public image among the inner colonies and the outer colonies, so any direct actions against him could lead to a negative outcome within the public and the military. Secretary Hart nodded in agreement with her statement about the potential negative consequences. "I agree, Mr. President," she said. "Taking action against Admiral Woods would likely cause backlash, given his fame within the UNSC despite a few high-ranking admirals who may not approve of his rapid promotion." "I understand," President Moore replied. While they couldn't directly address the issue by demoting Admiral Woods, they could take action by removing Admiral Ross from his position as chairman and promoting another fleet admiral in his place, preventing any further promotions for Admiral Woods. "Here's an idea. We can remove Admiral Ross from the chairman position and restrict any chance of promotion for Admiral Woods for a few years. This should satisfy the complaints from other high-ranking admirals and prevent any more discord," suggested President Moore. Secretary Wilson and Secretary Hart nodded at the proposal. "I concur, Mr. President," Secretary Wilson replied. "While Admiral Ross may bear the brunt of the political backlash, I will have a conversation with him. We have a close relationship and I am confident we can reach an understanding. After all, Admiral Ross is well versed in the workings of politics. Wilson, please carry out that task, and Ms. Hart, please monitor the situation and report on how everyone responds," President Moore instructed. "Absolutely, Mr. President. I will closely observe the situation and work to mitigate any potential negative consequences," Secretary Hart responded dutifully. President Moore gave a nod of acknowledgement. "Well then, I suppose that concludes our meeting. Have a good day, Wilson and Ms. Hart." The two secretaries took their leave, exiting the office leaving President Moore alone. He stared out of the window, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew that he had made the best decision given the circumstances. No one could deny that Admiral Wood's rapid ascension through the ranks had disrupted the balance within the Navy. Yet he also knew that what Admiral Woods had accomplished on his recent assignment was of great benefit to the UEG. That's why he chose to just prevent another promotion for a few years instead of demoting him, since he had proved that he earned his rank. Meanwhile, aboard the Leviathan, Axel had just arrived above Algal and had docked at the station orbiting the planet. Before he left the ship, Axel had approved shore leave for the entire battle group and organized a celebration within the mess hall of the facility. His battle group had proven themselves during his first assignment as admiral to a battle group, and he was going to show them how much he appreciated them. Axel stood at the front of the mess hall and surveyed his crew, feeling pride swell within them. The room hummed with anticipation, the scent of the hearty food being served and the clinking of glasses enhancing the festive atmosphere. A cheer went up as he lifted his glass in a toast. "To Battle Group Tango," he called out, his voice resonating in the large hall. "To your bravery, dedication, and incomparable service to our United Earth government. You have surpassed all expectations, and for that, I am proud." The room erupted in cheers, glasses raised high as a chorus of voices echoed his sentiment. The celebration continued late into the night, laughter and stories exchanged between comrades. It was moments like these that Axel cherished most, the camaraderie among soldiers who'd faced death together and lived to tell the tale. He enjoyed the festivities despite his cold personality. And while not a part of their victory, Axel had invited the staff of the facility since the food that he had requested to be delivered was too much for just his battle group. With thousands of people, the celebration had extended to the outside of the facility as well, and the facility's staff was given the day off. Amidst the revelries, Halsey, who had indulged in a few too many drinks, was leaning heavily on Axel's shoulder while clutching a cup. "You can never leave again," she slurred, her voice betraying her drunken state. "No promises, Halsey," said Axel, who was only on his second drink. Hearing this, Halsey rose her eyebrows. "You know what? No more of this Halsey nonsense. From now on you will call me Katherine. Actually no, you can only call me Kath and nobody else." She stared right into his eyes, waiting for him to call her Kath. Axel knew he wasn't going to get out of this situation without letting her win, so he did as she requested. "Well, Kath, I think you have had too many drinks and it's getting late." "Oh, no you don't." Kath burst out in a flustered giggle, lightly swatting at him with her free hand. "You're not sending me off to bed, Axel. I'm not some cadet who can't handle her drink." Seeing his opportunity, Axel teased gently, "I don't know, Kath. You're leaning quite heavily on me." As if to prove him wrong, she straightened herself, only to nearly topple as the room seemed to spin around her. Axel's quick reflexes caught her before she fell. "Perhaps one less drink next time," he suggested once he'd righted her. Kath just laughed and playfully shoved him away. She made a clumsy yet determined attempt to stand by herself. Her feet wobbled beneath her and Axel was ready again to catch her if she lost balance. The rest of the night continued in a similar vein, moments of joy, camaraderie, and playful jests that echoed through the facility. But all things must come to an end, and Axel had to make sure that everybody could work the next day, so when it got too late he shut the party down. The crew was able to continue their shore leave in town if they wanted, while the facility workers had to make sure that they could come into work the next day. At the end, Axel had to carry Katherine to her room before he retired to his room. Quietly exiting her room, Axel made his way back to his own quarters, the memories of the night swirling in his mind. With a contented sigh, Axel closed his eyes, letting the warmth of friendship and camaraderie lull him into a peaceful slumber. Chapter 26. As the sun rose, everyone returned to their assigned tasks. Axel was the final one to leave his quarters. The facility was alive with the aftermath of the celebrations from the night before, its hallways filled with the sounds of laughter and conversations about the crew's adventures. As Axel walked through the facility, he could tell that the cleaning staff of the facility had worked hard to clean up the mess that had appeared overnight. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the sweet scent of spilled ale and smoked meats from the festivities. After a few minutes, Axel had arrived at the facility's hangar where Commander Talia and Petty Officer Taylor was waiting for him. "Good morning, Admiral," said Commander Talia as she, Petty Officer Taylor and the escorting Marines had saluted. Axel returned the salute and walked up to Commander Talia. "How has the morning been so far, Commander?" asked Axel. "After last night it has been quite a morning, but after some coffee and a hearty breakfast, everything fell into place," Commander Talia replied, her face reflecting the toil of the morning coupled with the glow of the previous night's celebration. Petty Officer Taylor, ever so chipper, chimed in, "The hangar bay's been swept and inspected, sir." Taylor was designated the petty officer in charge of conducting inspections in Axel's place, with Commander Talia helping out here and there. "Excellent," Axel responded before turning his attention to the vast hangar bay where maintenance crews were working diligently on the longswords and pelicans. Axel took a few moments to look over the longswords and pelicans and thought that they could use some improvement. Both the craft could use some energy shields to be able to survive longer in battle. The Pelican was already a good troop transport ship for the UNSC, so changing the design wasn't something that Axel wanted to do at the time. While the longsword had room for improvement in its engines, weapons, armor, and technology. After a few seconds of staring at the two aircraft in the hangar, Axel finally pulled his gaze away and turned back to his officers. "Let's get going. We have much to do today." With that, they proceeded to board a Pelican and head towards the Spartan training facility, where Axel would look at the progress of the Spartans and see how far they have come, and to also become the first one to be genetically altered. On the way to the facility, Commander Talia passed Axel a small tablet displaying an article about a recent change in leadership within the UNSC. Axel took the tablet and read the headline, "Chairman of the UNSC Fleet Admiral Ross resigns due to political pressure." Axel sighed upon seeing this, since it was only a matter of time until this happened. Admiral Ross tried to ignore the politics, just focus on doing what he thought was right and for the betterment of the UNSC. And while he was correct in a sense, he still caused some internal strife with other admirals and officers. Though there could be some other motive as to why Admiral Ross was fired, thought Axel. Because the position of chairman was the highest position that one could hold within the UNSC, and maybe some other fleet admiral wanted that position. And with Admiral Ross gone, Axel knew exactly what was going to happen. No more promotions for a while, I guess. "Seems like they couldn't handle Ross's blunt approach," Commander Talia said, breaking Axel's train of thought. "What Admiral Ross saw for the future and what the others saw was two different things," Axel replied. "But I'll be damned if they think they can meddle with my battle group. There's talk of another fleet admiral taking his place, but I'm not sure who," Taylor mentioned. Axel nodded, hearing this information. The new chairman will probably be another fleet admiral who will prevent Axel from rising in the ranks for a few years. Should Axel be worried? Maybe, but there was going to be a big war in the coming years where they will need people like him to save humanity. And once that time comes, he will use his knowledge of advanced technology and his ability to command in order to rank up to the top. And if is still blocked from getting promoted, then he will just take matters into his own hands. He didn't want to waste time on dealing with those stubborn old fools on the Security Council who will deny him what he deserves when the time comes. Leaving that matter aside, after a few more minutes of flying, the Pelican had landed at its destination, which was the landing area at the Spartan training grounds. Axel could already see the line-up of Spartans standing at attention, perfectly positioned in a row. "Admiral on deck," bellowed a Chief Mendez as soon as Axel stepped out of the Pelican, and swiftly every Spartan saluted, their combined motion sounding like a gust of wind passing by. "At ease," Axel commanded. The ranks lowered their hands in unison, waiting for his next words. "You're looking sharp today," and I see you have grown," said Axel as he observed how taller the Spartans had gotten. "How has the training been, Chief Mendez?" asked Axel. "It's been quite well, Admiral. Your training regime has helped the young Spartans balance their duty with their humanity, and they have shown considerable progress as a team," replied Chief Mendez. "Excellent to hear, Chief Mendez. I have read over their training reports and I am pleased with the progress they are making," Axel responded with a nod of approval. He walked along the line of Spartans, observing their disciplined stance and sharp focus. Once he made it where Spartan 117, also known as John, was standing, he stepped forward and saluted. "Admiral, it's an honor to have you here today. We appreciate your guidance and support." Axel returned the salute and replied, "The honor is mine, Spartan 117. You and your team have been performing exceptionally well. I have no doubt that you will continue to excel in your training." Spartan 117 nodded respectfully before speaking on behalf of the group. "Thank you, Admiral. We are committed to becoming the best that we can be, for the UNSC and for humanity." Impressed by their dedication, Axel smiled and said, "That kind of determination is exactly what we need in this critical time. Remember, each one of you plays a vital role in defending our future." As he finished his brief speech, Axel turned around to face the training grounds. The vast expanse of simulated terrain, dotted with varied obstacles and marked targets, stretched out before them. "Your training ground is a testament to your dedication. All of you have overcome its challenges, time and time again. But remember, the real battle will be much more unpredictable." "Understood, sir." John's voice echoed strong and clear, prompting unified responses from the other Spartans. With that, Axel walked further into the facility, leaving the Spartans behind to continue their training. Once inside, Axel had walked over to the medical part of the facility where the Spartan enhancements would take place when the time comes. Once he entered that part of the facility, Dr. Halsey was already waiting on him. "Halsey," said Axel, trying to maintain a professional environment in front of the other staff. "Admiral," Halsey said, attempting to hide her embarrassment from the previous night's events. "It's time for the first test of the genetic alteration," said Axel. Halsey sighed, since she had been waiting for this day for years, but she still wasn't prepared for it. But she had been decided to accept it, and she would be lying if she said she didn't want to see the results. "Very well," said Dr. Halsey as she turned around, started talking to the staff to prepare Project Aster for activation. For Axel, Halsey had prepared various special procedure for Axel, since he wouldn't need the same enhancements that the Spartans would get. This was a secret project that would be conducted on Axel and was only known by a select few people to keep it secret. Now once everything pops off, Axel would be able to fight on the front lines. Chapter 27. As Axel laid on the surgery bed, his arms and legs were placed in their respective positions while he was strapped down. All around Axel the machines started to move and administer the sedative which would put Axel into a state of unconsciousness. Beforehand his head was shaved and incision vectors were lasered on his body. Once all of that was done, Axel was transported from the pre-OP wing of the facility to the operation wing, where all the Spartan procedures were planned to happen in the coming months. The aim of Project Aster is chemical augmentation, which works on a molecular level by targeting molecules within the body and then altering them to begin a growth process of targeted tissues. Although the chemicals work on a molecular level, they do not work on a genetic level, as targeted mutagenesis is impossible using chemicals alone. As such, the procedure was split into two parts: surgical procedures and injection procedures. Surgeries were highly risky, intensive, and required special medical talent. Their safety and effects varied substantially from subject to subject, with the benefits and risks varying with the surgeon, the surgical conditions, and the state of the patient. Chemical augmentations have their own risks dependent upon the subject's genetic background and how they adjust to the alteration of cells and molecules and to a more physical point, tissue growth. Axel had already fixed this problem, and now anybody could undergo the procedure essentially, if they underwent extensive gene therapy. The next thing that happened was the replacing of the organs. During the occipital capillary reversal, a neurosurgeon cuts out a small space in the skull, exposing the brain. The neurosurgeon then performs a procedure to rearrange the capillaries in the occipital lobe of the left cerebral hemisphere of the brain. This redistribution of blood vessels boosts the flow of blood beneath the rods and cones of the subject's retina. Once the surgery is complete, the piece of the subject's skull that was removed in order to access the occipital lobe is repaired and the subject's head is bandaged. When the catalytic thyroid implant is inserted, surgery is performed on the thyroid gland, where an incision is made to the left thyroid gland large enough for a platinum pellet to be implanted. Once done, the incision is closed up. The growth hormone is released and progressively works its way through the body, stimulating the growth of skeletal and muscle tissue. As this takes place, muscular enhancement injections are administered throughout the subject's body to aid the previous procedure. This produces the most prolonged delay in the rest of the augmentation procedures as the subject's body begins to alter as a result of the previous procedure. The carbide ceramic ossification is performed last due to the aforementioned complications with post-grafting bone growth. This comprises exposing the skeletal structure, removing a small layer of surface bone, no more than 3% of the bone's volume, and then bonding the carbide ceramic shell in lieu of the removed surface bone material. This bonding is achieved through biochemical means to encourage natural bone integration and a tendency of the body to reattach the bone and ceramic if somehow separated. Once completed, the natural bonding of the skeleton to the ceramic layer continues while other stabilizing and therapeutic procedures are performed. The procedure dragged on for hours, and despite being sedated, Axel still felt intense pain. But enduring this procedure meant possibly becoming the most physically and intellectually capable human in history. So he did all he could and endured the pain throughout the procedure. Once the augmentation procedures was finished, Axel was transported to a special medical room to begin a long recovery process. In the normal Halo timeline, the healing process was supposed to take anywhere from weeks to months, but Axel had managed to lower it to just a month. While he is recovering, Commander Talia and Petty Officer Taylor would assist with his duties. And in case anything comes up, Axel had created the excuse that he had suffered a major injury during an electrical malfunction and was being treated by the medical staff at the Spartan training facility. Of course, this wasn't meant to be a well-thought-out excuse or anything, since it could be easily debunked if anyone dug a little deeper. If anything, when other high-ranking officers found out about this, some would probably hope that he didn't recover so that he didn't keep rising in rank. But leaving that matter aside, the procedure was successful and Axel was now a completely new human that had been chemically and genetically altered. The first week of recovery was the hardest. Axel's body felt heavy and strained, every breath he took was a battle, every step a war. He would often find himself losing consciousness in between his physical therapy sessions due to the overwhelming pain. But there was an iron will within him that refused to buckle under the torturous onslaught of his new reality. He kept pushing through. His nights were filled with fevered dreams, memories warped and twisted by his current predicament. He would see the UNSC Leviathan, her hull gleaming in the sunlight as it cut through the celestial sea. He would see Commander Talia and Petty Officer Taylor, expressions hardened by responsibility but eyes softened by concern for their admiral. There would be flashes of insurrectionists' forces, their resolve unyielding even in the face of overwhelming odds. And amidst all this, a chilling presence lurked on the fringes of his mind, a cold whisper urging him to give up, to surrender to the agony. But Axel always woke from those dreams drenched in sweat but with renewed determination. His new capabilities were coming into fruition gradually, he could feel his senses being heightened, his cognition enhanced. Each day he could see improvement in his speed and strength while practicing simulated combat routines against AI opponents. His muscles ached from exertion, but there was an exhilarating sense of power coursing through his veins. Weeks passed and slowly but surely, Axel was able to regain control over his own body once again. The excruciating pain became mundane discomfort, every step no longer felt like moving mountains but more akin to crossing pebbles. His physical therapy sessions became less a gauntlet of agony and more a test of strength. Even his nightly dreams began to change, the images of war and destruction were replaced with ones of victory and triumph. The final week of Axel's recovery was marked by a grueling series of physical examinations, stress tests, and combat scenarios designed to fully assess his new abilities. With each test, Axel proved himself again and again, shattering previous records and surpassing expectations. His body moved with precision and efficiency, each punch he threw was faster and harder than before, each step lighter yet more grounded. On the final day, Axel was at 100% and was able to return to his duties as Admiral and with his new appearance. He had gotten taller than before and was now standing at 6 feet 10 in and weighed 290 pounds compared to his previous appearance of 6 feet 3 and weighing 230 pounds. Halsey had become extremely infatuated with Axel during his recovery and was even more infatuated now after he had fully recovered. She was intrigued by the results of the first procedure but also by his new appearance. Chapter 28. Axel's new appearance had caught the attention of almost every staff member within the facility as well as the Spartans who had noticed his increased height and muscle mass. Axel was already 30 years old, meaning that his body stopped growing a long time ago, so this sudden increase in his height was something unheard of. He seemed like a completely different person, despite his appearance remaining unchanged. It was as if he had undergone a transformation, with some noticeable improvements. People were curious about what could have caused this change during the month he spent receiving treatment for injuries sustained in an electrical incident. At least, that's what they were told. The first thing that Axel did was to go see the Spartans to show them essentially what would be the results of their years of training. Chief Mendez had gathered the Spartans in front of their respective rooms, with the females being separate from he male's room. But the two rooms were still across the hall from each other. As he strolled down the hallway towards the Spartan barracks, he felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. He envisioned himself in a position of power, leading humanity to victory against their enemies and securing a better future. The Spartans were just one of the many items on his list, all aimed at advancing humanity's technological progress. The Spartans, emblematic of courage and discipline, represented not just a mere item on his list, but a symbol of resilience and unwavering dedication to pushing the boundaries of human potential. In their unwavering resolve, they embodied the essence of progress, driving forward the relentless pursuit of knowledge and advancement. Once he reached the door leading the barracks rooms, Axel had paused for a moment before the doors opened, revealing the Spartans already lined up and standing at attention. Chief Mendez called the Spartans to attention before Axel addressed them. "Good morning, Spartans," he began, his voice echoing around the room. Every Spartan was at full attention, their eyes fixed on the man standing in front of them. "Does anybody notice any changes about me?" asked Axel. One of the Spartans, a particularly observant one named Kelly, was the first to break the silence. "You're taller, sir," she said, her clear voice carrying across the room. A few others nodded in agreement. "Good eye, Kelly." Axel responded with a grin, "and not just taller." He flexed his arm, showing off his enhanced muscle mass. A murmur of awe traveled throughout the room. The transformation was striking indeed. Some Spartans glanced at each other in surprise while others kept their gaze firmly on him, attempting to hide their astonishment. "This appearance of mine is similar to what you will be getting in the coming months. It will enhance all aspects of your abilities and make you far stronger than normal soldiers," explained Axel. "Everybody in this room is guaranteed to survive and pass the procedure. And as for the pain, well, you have been preparing for this moment for years, so anybody who can't handle it is weak," stated Axel. "Understood, Admiral," the Spartans responded in unison, determination evident in their voices. Axel could see the fire of resolve burning in their eyes. They were ready to face this challenge, just like they had faced every other challenge put in their path. As he looked out over the ranks of young soldiers, Axel knew that they would be the key to his success in the future. These were humanity's finest, the best and brightest of their generation. They were those who would carry forth the torch of progress and advancement into an unknown future. "Now, I won't keep you from your sleep anymore. Continue your training and soon enough you'll be as strong as me and have more responsibilities," Axel said as he turned around and left the barracks rooms. Once he left, he proceeded to take a Pelican back to the main facility where he would begin working on a few projects for the upcoming years. He knew that in the upcoming years the UNSC would be at war with the Covenant and he would need some more advanced technology so that when the time comes he can equip his battle group with more advanced technology to stand toe-to-toe with the Covenant ships. So as soon as the Pelican landed, Axel headed straight towards his office while greeting the staff and crewmen along the way. Once he arrived at his lab, Axel had immediately got to work on coming up with the designs for the new military technology that he planned to introduce. Yvonne, his personal AI that he had created for helping around the lab, had activated. "Welcome back, Admiral, what shall we work on today?" Axel placed his officer's blouse on his chair before he responded, "We shall start developing the schematics for new military technology, Yvonne, so bring up the MTCP." The MTCP was short for the Military Technology Creation Program that Axel had created a few years ago. The MTCP was essentially a master program that utilized a range of tools to design a variety of military vehicles, including ships, starfighters, gunships, troop transports, and weapons. Utilizing these tools, Axel had the ability to create any type of military vehicle or weapon, incorporating both current and newly developed technology into his designs. Newly developed technology also referred to his own creations such as the energy shields. In a few seconds the lights had dimmed in the room and in a large holographic projection had popped up in front of Axel. He didn't waste any time and started to get to work on first creating new ground vehicles to fight against the Covenant. The first thing he would create was a new version of the M808 main battle tank, or Scorpion. While the Scorpion is a versatile tank that has its uses and can stand against the Covenant ground vehicles, it was still lacking in terms of agility defense. Its firepower was not a problem, nor was its 4-track independent computer-controlled suspension system, which allowed it to traverse, climb over, or maneuver around large debris or other battlefield obstacles, and prevents the vehicle from being easily disabled. The Scorpion had its thick ceramic titanium armor that could withstand a direct hit from a Covenant fuel rod, but at the cost of severe damage to the tank, and if the tank is bombarded by fuel rod shots then it was basically over. Axel had begun developing a more agile design that maintains the same firepower but also adds more defense, such as an energy shield built into the tank to offer more protection and so it can last longer in combat. He called it the S-180 Spider Tank. S-180 Spider Tank image here. Next up were the Warthogs, which he decided to leave unchanged but with a few additional enhancements to its defense. After the Warthogs were the infantry armor, weapons, infantry fighting vehicles, etc. Axel planned to spend the next 2 years completely revamping the UNSC military for when he gets into power. At the start of the war he will introduce things like the energy shield and new spider tanks to preserve more lives in the war, and he will outfit his battle group with some of the most advanced technology that he can think of. The time for the greatest threat to humans was coming, and he needed to have the technology ready to give them a fighting chance against the Covenant or to even dominate the Covenant. Chapter 29. During the following months, Axel dedicated his time to developing advanced military technology for the UNSC to utilize in the years ahead. He also worked on enhancing Ivan's abilities as an artificial intelligence. Even though he was already highly capable, he was not a flash clone of Axel's brain. During this time the new chairman of the UNSC was chosen. His name was Fleet Admiral Jacob Gardner. Ivan had gathered evidence through UNSC networks about Admiral Gardner relating to his success in his career. His success was mainly because of his years of service and his high political power within the UNSC and the civilian government. His selection as the new chairman was motivated by the politics and his rank as Fleet Admiral. Within the first month of him being chairman, Admiral Gardner had the Commander-in-Chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence stop the funding for MCU project of Section 3 but maintained the Spartan program. Any other funding was cut, as Admiral Gardner called it a waste of the UNSC resources since they were already contracted to buy robotic units from Misrai Armory. Instead, Admiral Gardner wanted Section 3 to focus on research into new space weapons instead of costly robotic units. Once Axel found out about this, he slammed his fist on his office desk since it was such a stupid idea, as it would only hinder their production of MCU units. There was 2 factories on Algal which was dedicated to the production of MCU units and have built around 10,000 units since their creation. But now those factories were about to be shut down since they won't be getting any more materials to produce more MCUs. Commander Talia stood there reading the news to Axel, as she also felt that this decision was a stupid one as well. From her own observations she knew that the MCUs were a much better option when it comes to efficiency and abilities, while the robotic units created by Misrai Armory were prone to breaking down after long-term use, and in combat they were easy to destroy. Politics were not her forte, and she often struggled to make sense of them. Still, she couldn't help but question the UNSC's strategy of using inexpensive robots in their fight against insurgents. As a commander, her opinion didn't carry much weight with the admirals, except for Axel, who valued her unique perspective on certain matters. Axel, as he sat brooding in his office, finally spoke. He said his thoughts out loud, more to himself than to Talia. MCUs are adaptable to both land and space combat, where our enemies have the advantage. They are efficient and cost-effective. Misrai's robots, they might be cheaper but they lack the adaptiveness and durability of MCUs. Gardner is playing politics when we need strategy. He slumped back in his chair. A strange silence filled the room as Ivan, still processing data in the background, watched quietly. Talia shifted her stance slightly, considering her next words. So, what do we do now, Admiral? Her tone was calm yet full of concern. Axel pondered over this question for a minute before responding. For now we can't do anything, so we will just adapt to developing space weapons. With a heavy exhale, Axel acknowledged that making any significant changes at this moment would only cause chaos. He couldn't help but question why he stayed in the UNSC, under the watchful eyes of outdated leaders who cling to traditional military practices instead of prioritizing what's best for the organization. His gaze drifted to the vast holographic star map displayed on the wall of his office. The countless glowing dots represented different colonies, each with their unique situations and challenges. It was a stark visual reminder of the magnitude of their tasks. Suddenly, Ivan's voice broke the silence. Admiral, I may have a potential solution. Axel turned his attention to the AI who had manifested himself in the form of a translucent projection. He was curious as to what Ivan had in mind. Ivan continued, the resources for MCU units can be sourced from other colonies where we have some leverage. We can continue our production covertly using those resources while maintaining the official stance of focusing on space weapon research. Axel looked at Ivan thoughtfully. It wasn't a perfect solution and carried its risks, but under the circumstances, it seemed plausible. He nodded slightly, acknowledging Ivan's input. That might work, he said. We'll need to carefully manage our resource allocation though and ensure that no leaks or paper trails lead back to us, should anyone within the UNSC start asking questions. Axel continued. Ivan, work with Commander Talia to lay out a detailed plan for this. Talia nodded, her posture straightening as she prepared to take on this new task. Understood, Admiral. After that, Talia and Ivan got to work on coming up with a detailed plan to execute this task without any way of it getting leaked to other members of the UNSC. Meanwhile, Axel prepared a few projects to get the chairman's eyes off of him. The first was a project to develop a new ship-to-ship autocannon that could be utilized for both shielded and unshielded targets. Though the actual description for the weapon would be just ship-to-ship combat. Axel would drag this project on for the next 2 years just because of his dislike of Admiral Gardner. In addition, he would keep up the secret production of the MCUs without the UNSC knowing about. A few months after Section 3 got new orders to change its focus, it was now the year 2522. Hammer and the other MCUs fighting the insurrectionists had returned to Algal after their success within the inner colonies. The insurrectionists were little to no threat to the UNSC at this point thanks to Axel's success in the outer colonies and Hammer's battalion's success in the inner colonies. And with this success also brought about some positives. Axel had received some thanks from many high-ranking officers in the other branches who was thanking Axel for the creation of the MCUs since they made preserving lives much easier and they were very adaptable. And on top his medals which were sent to him upon his completion of his mission in the outer colonies, he had gained some additional medals and awards for his contribution to the UNSC by General Daniel Black of the UNSC Marine Corps. In his letter he described the MCUs as highly advanced and adaptable, and he also mentioned how he didn't understand the reasoning behind their replacement by the Misraya's robots, which he stated to be unresponsive at times and less efficient than the MCUs. It seems not only did Axel and Commander Talia see it as an illogical choice, but did other high-ranking members of the UNSC Security Council. Chapter 30. Seeing that others were also seeing the incompetence of the new chairman Admiral Gardner, Axel used this opportunity to make some allies within the High Command. The first would be General Daniel Black of the UNSC Marine Corps. General Black had already expressed his concerns over the new leadership, and after some thorough investigating by Ivan, Axel found out that General Black was a potential ally within the UNSC Security Council. The second was General Jacob Stone of the UNSC Air Force. General Stone was a close friend of General Black since they shared the same views about the UNSC with each other. General Stone was also against the defunding of the MCUs as he saw their potential use within all branches of the UNSC. General Liam Graham of the UNSC Army was more of a neutral party who didn't appear to lean on one side or the other. But still he could maybe be convinced considering the amount of lives the MCUs saved during their deployments. Next was Admiral Margaret Parangaski, who is the Commander-in-Chief of the Office of Naval Intelligence. She had been in office since 2511 and was the one who supported Admiral Gardner's decision to defund the MCU program. She saw it as a direct threat to her position as the Commander-in-Chief of ONI because of Axel's quick rise in the ranks and his rising influence within ONI. And the MCUs only reinforced his influence because of their efficiency and uses. So when Miss Rye Armory asked for data on the design, she didn't hesitate to give them that data despite Admiral Ross's decision to deny them that data. But what she didn't know was that the data that Axel had gave them was not the full data on the MCUs, which is why the Miss Rye robots were created with many deficiencies. But to Admiral Parangaski, the Miss Rye robots had their uses and they were cheap to build, making them easier to mass produce in the thousands. The last member of the High Command was Admiral Jake Jackson, who was the newly appointed Chief of Naval Operations, CNO. He was a tough and hardened military man who had fought in many battles throughout his tenure. Ross was a traditionalist, dedicated to the classic naval strategies and opposed to the use of MCUs. Axel decided to approach General Black first. The latter had an air of war weariness that Axel found reassuring. Axel had traveled to Earth where the two met in a private place, where Axel shared his concerns about the new leadership. He found Black to be receptive, nodding along to Axel's words. It's not just about defunding the MCU program. It's about making sure we have the right tools for this war, Axel told him. And right now, I don't think Gardner understands that. Next was General Stone. The meeting with him was brief, but Axel knew he had made an impact when he saw the telltale signs of thoughtfulness in Stone's eyes after their discussion. You might be onto something, Axel, he admitted finally. I'll think about it. General Graham was exactly as his reputation suggested, neutral, almost too neutral. He neither agreed nor disagreed with Axel's viewpoints but gave them careful consideration. However, Axel left their meeting feeling somewhat hopeful. As for Admiral Parangaski and Admiral Jake Jackson, Axel didn't even bother with those two since Admiral Parangaski was already wary of him and he saw her as someone who valued their position above anything else. While Admiral Jake Jackson was just a political replacement for Admiral Ross as the CNO. Next Axel started to look for other people who shared his thoughts, preferably other officers, and even some civilians. He also looked for other highly intelligent people to join him as civilian consultants. These civilian consultants would be used to in a sense to help develop advanced technology. Axel's first step was to bring in Dr. Yvonne Carter, a brilliant civilian scientist who had been involved with the original MCU project. She had been vocal about her displeasure at the short-sightedness of suspending the program and Axel felt she would be a valuable asset to his cause. When Axel proposed his plan to her, she agreed readily, her fiery spirit fanned by the prospect of bringing Axel's creations back into action. Next, was Lieutenant Jack Harper, a young officer from Marine Corps. He had served under Axel aboard the Leviathan before and held a deep respect for the Admiral. He had seen firsthand the practicality of the MCUs on the battlefield and held no loyalty to the new chairman. With a bit of persuasion, Harper too joined Axel's growing coalition. From within his own ranks, he approached Major Karen Lewis, an ONI intelligence analyst whose insights and loyalty were unsurpassed. Lewis was known for her independent thought and keen knack for predicting political maneuvers. Although reluctant at first due to her standing position in ONI, she finally conceded when Axel presented her with undeniable evidence of the potential threats looming over UNSC. In Admiral Parangaski's department, he managed to sway over an unlikely ally commander Marcus Bishop. Bishop was a veteran field agent for ONI who didn't share Parangaski's disdain for the MCUs. His influence within ONI was limited but his resources and intelligence network could prove invaluable. With his allies gathered together, Axel began crafting subtle strategies aimed at shifting the balance of power within the high command. Mirroring the intricate moves of a galactic chess game, he worked meticulously in the shadows, setting his pieces in motion. Once his pieces were in motion, it was all a waiting game. Once the war initially starts, the incompetence of the UNSC to handle to Covenant will warrant some action from many officers, and enlisted alike. Hundreds of thousands of lives will be lost in the beginning, but their sacrifice will allow Axel to prevent millions more in the later stages of the war. So for the next 2 years until 2524, Axel continued to gather like-minded individuals in secret and expand his battle group's fighting capability. With the resources from the outer colonies, Axel created a new autocannon that could tear through ship armor, with the secondary role of shield penetration. Axel had only come up with the idea of penetrating the Covenant's shields in theory, he wouldn't know if it would work until their first encounter with the enemy fleet. However, his knowledge of energy shielding gave him confidence that it could potentially be effective against the Covenants. If not, he would have to continue refining his technique after witnessing the initial battles between the UNSC and the Covenant. Leaving that matter aside for now, within these 2 years, the Spartans have completed their training and had successfully undergone their augmentations in 2522. All 150 Spartans had survived the procedure and they were given their Mark IV Mjolnir-powered assault armor. So from 2522 to 2524 they carried out assaults on the remaining insurrection bases both in the inner colonies and more recent ones in the outer colonies that had risen once again following Axel's departure. Chapter 31. A/N, you guys have showed so much support to the story, so here is another chapter. Hope you enjoy. Current year 2524, a year before the appearance of the Covenant. Axel during this year had came up with a new design for the standard infantry armor. Using his previous life's memories, he had based the design off of the Mass Effect armor, which covered most of the body and in some cases could offer a personal shield. But the personal shield was something that was too expensive to issue to hundreds of thousands of soldiers all at once, and the materials needed to create an easy-to-use rechargeable energy shield for standard infantry suits costs too much. Still, he created the suit without the energy shielding and made it costs around the same amount as the standard infantry gear that the UNSC already used. The armor looked like a miniaturized version of Spartan armor, only less bulky and without all the advanced technology that the Spartan armor had. Of course, it had similar technology to help in combat situations. Its abilities were limited to both save money and resources. New armor image here. In addition to that, he also created a new standard use armor for the orbital drop shock troopers, ODST, which included highly adaptable armor for any scenario, improved armor, personalized AI for support on the battlefield, and a tactical visor. Image here. Axel had planned to present these new armors to the UNSC Security Council in a few weeks. And he didn't forget about himself, since he would also need armor for himself, especially if he planned to fight on the front lines during the war. So he came up with a personalized armor for himself modeled after the Spartan armor, only it was developed for his use only. Axel's personal armor image here. For his own armor he went all out for developing it. It came with a mini-core reactor providing the armor with an insane amount of power for the energy shields. Its agility was as maneuverable as the Mark IV Mjolnir armor, and provided generally the same amount of benefits. His armor costs 2x more than the Mark IV Mjolnir armor but provided way more benefits and survivability. A/N, just for reference. The Mark IV Mjolnir armor had way better energy shielding than it did in the normal Halo timeline, but it was not near the amount that Axel's armor because of the mini-core reactor providing the suit with way more power than the Mark IV Mjolnir armor had. Also the mini-core reactor was hard to create, which is why Axel only had it in his armor instead of all the Spartans' armor. But future enhancements will see this added. The MCUs were also given a new look regarding their appearance. It would take another year to redesign all of them, but after that year all the MCUs would have their new appearance maintaining their same capabilities. Amidst the process of his ambitious project, Axel had also taken the liberty to design a new series of weaponry for the UNSC, as he believed that defense was only as good as the strike power you held. Drawing inspiration from an array of sources from the pulse rifles of the Aliens franchise to the smart guns from Star Wars, he developed a line of advanced, yet cost-effective firearms capable of meeting various combat scenarios. His creations ranged from standard assault rifles with improved recoil stabilizers and ammunition capacity, to high-powered sniper rifles, which were equipped with advanced AI-guided targeting systems that could calculate wind speed, distance and other factors for incredible accuracy. These potentially lethal weapons were designed to work in sync with the tactical visor within the new armor system, further increasing their effectiveness. Axel's personal weapon, though, was another work of art. A custom-built railgun able to fire supercharged projectiles with devastating force. His personal armor's mini-core reactor acting not just as a shield generator but also powering this weapon made it possible to carry such immense firepower without any drawbacks. On a more defensive note, Axel didn't neglect the need for spatial fortification. He drafted blueprints for highly advanced orbital defense platforms, utilizing cutting-edge unslaved AI management systems and armed with powerful MAC cannons. Ensuring that these installations would be an effective deterrent against any potential enemy invasions on human colonies. Whether or not these defense platforms will be put into use was up to the UNSC Security Council. Simply ignoring these new highly advanced defense platforms would be illogical, but if they were, it wouldn't surprise Axel because they were slightly more expensive than other defense platforms. As the days rolled by, Axel's workshop began to resemble less of an armory and more like a futuristic arsenal. Yet he was far from done. His mind brimming with plans for vehicles and spacecrafts, Axel knew he was crafting the next generation of warfare technology. Every now and then, he would step away from his workstation to gaze upon his creations, their lethal beauty a sharp contrast to the tranquil silence of his workshop. He would take time off to visit Katherine at times and take her out into the local town for dinner dates and whatnot. While this was going on, Katherine was distracted by his new appearance, which made him stand out way more than what she wanted. Just walking around the local town attracted attention to him. She always held onto his arm and stayed close to show those vixens that he was not available, which warded off a few, but there was always those that would still try. Axel could only smile at the interaction and wanted to tease her at times. He also knew that they had been basically in a relationship for a while now, and he could see that she wanted to take it to the next level. He was 34 this year, and it was about time that he focused a little of his attention on other matters while maintaining his focus. So the next time they went out, he planned to take it to the next level with Kath to calm her emotions and not let her think that he was leading her on. Chapter 32, Bonus Chapter, R18, Night with Kath. Warning. R18. At the end of their next date, Axel had brought Katherine to a room in which he rented to spend the night away from the facility. He had spent a week preparing this room and also spent some of his personal funds on it to make a night to remember. Katherine found herself in the room, her senses overwhelmed by the cozy atmosphere created by Axel. The scent of lavender and vanilla filled the space, mixed with his subtle cologne. Axel closed the door behind him and locked it, leaning against it with a satisfied sigh as he turned to face her. His eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Here we are," he said, his voice husky, "my little haven away from everything else." She looked around, taking it all in, the neatly made bed with crisp white sheets and plush pillows, the small kitchenette tucked in one corner with its half-full bottle of wine. A large painting hung above the bed depicting a serene countryside scene, stars twinkled in an ink-black sky above them. As she glanced back at Axel, she noticed his fingers brushing through his hair absently while he watched her explore. His gaze was intense yet tender, full of promise for what lay ahead between them tonight. Her heart skipped a beat as he stepped closer and trailed his fingertips down her jawline before cupping her face gently in his hands. Their breath intermingled as he leaned forward to press their lips together ever so softly at first, then deeper as their tongues met in his passionate kiss. Katherine melted into him, feeling his strong and warm frame envelope hers as they sank onto the plush mattress together. His large hands explored her waist, sliding up to curve around her lower back before pulling her body tight against his chest. She sighed softly into the kiss, savoring the taste of his lips and the feeling of his rough stubble scratching slightly against hers. His fingers traced circles on her back while their tongues tangled lazily in a slow dance that seemed to go on forever. As he pulled away, Axel looked down at her with a smoldering gaze that made her shiver with anticipation. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long," he murmured, nibbling at her earlobe before trailing delicate kisses along her jawline and down to her neck. The sweet scent of lavender from the room's fragrance filled her nostrils, mixing with the taste of his skin and sending tingles through every nerve ending. She gasped softly as he undid the clasp of her dress, sliding it off her shoulders and down her arms, revealing her lacy black bra beneath. He took one pearl-colored bud between his lips and suckled gently, causing a moan to escape from deep within her throat. Her body arched involuntarily into him as he ran his hands up and down her legs, leaving trails of fire wherever his touch landed. The sound of buttons popping open echoed in the small space as he removed his own shirt, exposing strong torso covered in rigid muscles and smooth skin. Katherine's hands fumbled with his belt buckle while Axel's lips trailed lower, kissing a path down her body. Katherine's heart thumped wildly in her chest, and she couldn't help but moan as he moved his lips down to her stomach, kissing and licking her skin there gently. A shiver ran through her body as he unfastened her bra, his teeth grazed her collarbone lightly, exposing her supple flesh to the cool air. Axel planted a trail of soft kisses along her pale skin, each one making it harder for Katherine to breathe. His hands slipped underneath her panties, and he groaned when he felt how wet she was for him. Katherine gasped at the sensation, arching into his touch as he teased and caressed her folds with his fingers, making her tremble with desire. "Axel," she whispered, unable to form coherent thoughts as he licked and nibbled his way back up to her quivering nipples. He sucked on one hardened bud while playing with the other, making Katherine's head roll back in pleasure. The taste of him on her skin, the smell of lavender mixed with their sweat, the sound of their heavy breathing filled the intimate space as they continued their passionate dance. He pressed himself against her thigh, his rigid length throbbing against her core, and she whimpered softly. He bent down again, kissing his way back up to meet her lips once more, his tongue diving deep into her mouth as their bodies ground together in rhythm. His hand slid between them, and he rubbed his finger teasingly over her soaked entrance before slipping it inside of her. She cried out into their kiss, desperate for more of him. Axel smiled against her lips before pulling back slightly. "You." Axel took her moan as encouragement, his hands trailing up her thighs, hips, and torso once more. He slid his tongue across her neck, nipping lightly. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against her skin. Katherine felt a delicious shudder run through her body. She arched into him again, unable to resist his touch as he pushed her back onto the soft mattress. The rustle of fabric filled the air as they both discarded their clothes, revealing their naked forms entwined in the glow of the soft lamplight filtering through the dim room. Katherine's body was perfect and pale under his gaze, and he couldn't help but admire every curve and line. His hands traced every inch of her flesh, leaving trails of goosebumps in their wake. He kissed his way down her stomach again, this time paying extra attention to the soft hair that dusted her mound. The scent of lavender mixed with sweat became even more intense as he pressed kisses to her inner thighs and played with her folds with his tongue. Katherine's hips jerked up off the bed at the sensation, she could feel every inch of him exploring her wetness with his mouth. She gripped fistfuls of his hair as he lavished attention on her most sensitive spots, groaning into the sheets beneath them. It felt like an eternity before he finally found his target, his rough tongue circling around her clit before plunging inside in one swift movement. Her breath caught in her throat as he suckled and teased, his fingers digging into her lower back. Axel heard a soft cry escape from Katherine's lips as she gripped the sheets tighter. Axel couldn't believe the sounds coming from her lips as he lavished attention on her. He was a man possessed, driven by his need to make her feel good. With each stroke of his tongue, he plunged deeper and swirled more vigorously, determined to bring her to the edge of ecstasy. His fingers plunged inside her soaked warmth, finding her G-spot with ease, massaging it in small circles that only added to the pleasure coursing through her body. Katherine's moans mixed with the rustling of the sheets and the sounds of their heavy breathing filled the small room. As she grew closer to climaxing, Axel pulled away teasingly, only to rise up and capture one pebbled nipple into his mouth, suckling hard while his fingers continued their work. She cried out in protest and pleading all at once, arching into him desperately. He groaned against her skin, loving how responsive she was underneath him. With one hand, he reached down and parted her folds wider as he thrust 2 fingers inside of her rhythmically while continuing to work her clit with his thumb. Her walls squeezed tightly around his fingers as she neared release, and Axel growled low in his throat when he felt her wet heat clench around him. He increased the pressure on her clit as she cried out again, begging for more. His fingers pumped in and out of her at a frantic pace now, hitting that spot inside of her that made everything blurry and sparkly around the edges. She shattered beneath him with a scream that echoed off the walls of this intimate space they shared for this night. Panting heavily, Axel lifted himself off of her briefly before sliding back up between her legs. Axel's eyes sparkled with satisfaction as he watched Katherine's back arch and her fingers clutch onto the sheets with a feral desperation, her breath coming in pants and gasps as she reached her peak. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the smell of lavender and sweat lingering heavily in the air. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride as he looked down at his handiwork, marveling at the marks he left on her body. She was beautiful, her skin flushed with pleasure, her lips swollen from their intense kisses. As she finally calmed down from her climax, Axel positioned himself between her legs once more. He licked his thumb and swiped it across her entrance, circling his tongue lazily before pushing it inside gently. She shuddered at the sensation as he slowly stretched her out with his tongue, feeling every curve and ridge of his mouth. His other hand cupped her breast, massaging it gently as he began to thrust in and out, tasting every inch of her wet heat. Her walls squeezed around him tightly each time he retreated, making it clear how much she wanted more of him. He groaned low in his throat, savoring the taste of her essence on his tongue. As he slid his wet tongue inside of her, Axel found his rhythm, plunging in and out in a thrusting motion that matched the pace of his fingers. The taste of her essence on his tongue only fueled his desire for more. Katherine moaned and whimpered under his skilled ministrations, her hips bucking off the mattress as if trying to ride the wave of pleasure. He suckled harder, feeling her walls clench around his fingers and tasting her sweet nectar. Her scent overwhelmed him, a blend of lavender oil from their room mixing with their sweat and her natural musk. It was intoxicating. His free hand trailed up her stomach, tracing patterns on her skin as he worked her body into a frenzy once more. Axel looked up at her for a moment, watching her face contort with pleasure, eyes rolling back into her head as she gripped the sheets with trembling hands. He groaned low in his throat and thrust deeper inside of her with his fingers, hitting that spot that made everything inside him tighten up. She cried out, nails digging into the sheets as he tongued her hardened bud one last time before withdrawing both digits. With one quick motion, he lined himself up and plunged inside of her tight heat in one swift stroke. Her body welcomed him like a long-lost lover, hot and wet from their earlier activities. He gripped her hips firmly, pulling out almost all the way before pushing back inside of her slowly but surely. Their moans filled the room as they began to move together. It was a symphony of sounds echoing off the walls, skin slapping against skin, moans filling the small space they shared for this night's adventure. He continued to thrust into her, his hips slapping against her ass as they moved together in unison. Each time he withdrew, he teased her entrance with his tongue, flicking it lightly before pushing back inside. Her walls trembled and clenched around him, squeezing his cock with every thrust. Katherine's lips parted as she moaned his name over and over again. She threw her head back and gripped onto the sheets tightly, nails digging into the fabric as she let out small cries of pleasure that turned into deep moans. Axel's heart raced inside his chest, feeling the heat from her core against his skin. He couldn't believe how perfect she felt, how much she was enjoying this as well. He leaned down to capture one nipple between his teeth, sucking hard, causing a rush of endorphins to course through her body. His hands gripped her hips firmly, guiding their rhythm as they moved together in a dance of desire and passion. The room was filled with their pants and grunts and the sounds of skin slapping against skin. The smell of lavender mixed with their sweat and the scent of sex that filled the air only heightened the intensity of their lovemaking. Katherine's fingers dug into Axel's shoulders as she felt herself getting closer to another climax. She arched off the bed in anticipation, her walls clutching at him with each thrust. Axel groaned low in his throat when he felt her tighten around him again. This time it was different than before, something about it made him surge forward even more powerfully. His fingers dug into her hips as he pounded into her harder and faster, desperate to feel that sweet release once more. As their hips moved in a frenzy, Katherine cried out his name and threw her head back in ecstasy. Her nails dug into his skin, leaving small crescents of pleasure pain that only fueled his desire. He growled low in his throat at the feeling of her walls clamping down on him, her muscles contracting with each hard thrust. The scent of lavender mixed with their sweat was intoxicating, making it difficult for him to control himself as he plunged deeper inside of her. Axel's breath hitched when he felt her inner walls squeeze against him again and again, the sensation overwhelming him. His fingers dug into her hips, finding purchase on her flesh as he pounded into her harder and faster. Her cries echoed around them, mingling with the rustling of the sheets and slapping of their bodies together. The taste of her essence on his tongue made him shudder, sending waves of pleasure coursing through him. He leaned down, capturing one nipple between his teeth as he felt her climax approaching yet again. Her soft whimpers turned to loud moans, and he felt the tightening of her muscles signaling her impending release. With one final hard thrust, he allowed himself to give in to his own climax, groaning against her skin as he felt hot pleasure ripple through him. Their bodies shook together in unison as they found release amidst the cacophony of sounds. They collapsed onto the bed together, panting heavily as they tried to catch their breath after such intense lovemaking. Axel could feel the stickiness between them where they were joined, a testament to their passionate encounter. Chapter 33, Chapter 32. The following morning Axel and Halsey had returned to their duties. Halsey didn't forget the night she spent with Axel and she was glad that it finally happened. And from now on she would look to take advantage of their time alone and utilize as much as possible. And since most of the Spartans were gone, Halsey had been studying the energy shielding that Axel came up with. While the concept to her was easy to understand, she wanted to see if she could replicate the process and create a different type of energy shielding. She would have loved to test it out using the mini-core reactor, but the cost of creating one was too much, so she had to make do without it until they could make one without worrying about resource management. Axel on the other hand had returned to his work of creating and testing out new technology. He had mostly finished and planned to present it to the UNSC Security Council within the next 2 weeks. And while he was finishing up the last bit of work, 2 weeks had passed and it was time to travel to Earth to meet with the UNSC Security Council. He stored all the data on a data chip and stored in a special case which he carried around with him. Also within this special case was the data on energy shielding, which he was sure that the Security Council will ask about. Once he was done packing up all of the things he needed, he boarded a Pelican and left for the UNSC Leviathan, his command ship. Since he was traveling to Earth, he didn't bring the entire battle group since it was not needed, so just brought the cruiser as an escort vessel. As soon as Axel stepped foot onto the USSC Leviathan, he was met with the familiar hum of its engines and the sharp salutes from his crew. He nodded his acknowledgements, making his way through the vessel towards his quarters. Once inside, he placed the special case containing the data chip on his desk. With the invention of his warp drive, the trip to Earth took about 45 minutes. As Earth's blue-green orb came into view, Axel grabbed the briefcase and headed towards the hangar. Once the Leviathan docked with the space station, he took a Pelican to the surface of the planet where he would meet the members of the Security Council at the UNSC headquarters located in Sydney, Australia, and introduce the new technology. The Pelican gracefully descended onto one of the landing pads strategically placed in the area. Axel exited the craft with his briefcase, squinting against the intense Australian sunlight. His escorting Marines stayed on board as he made his way to his destination. He was guided by 2 serious-looking Marines through a maze of hallways, their armor making a soft clinking noise against the polished marble floors. At last, they stopped outside an imposing wooden door, adorned with the UNSC emblem. One of the Marines knocked thrice before opening it for Axel, who entered into a vast conference room with a large circular table at its center. Around it were seated some of the most influential men and women in human space, admirals, generals, and the chairman. As soon as everyone settled down, Axel began to present his new technology. He walked them through his data and findings, showing off simulated projections and potential applications of his inventions. The council members watched intently, occasionally asking probing questions which Axel answered with ease. At the end of the presentation, most of the officers were highly impressed, especially with the new standard armor that could be introduced at the same cost of their current armor. The benefits were also great, and it would offer the infantry more adaptability on the battlefield. The new Nightfall multipurpose rifle was also something that caught their attention because of its multipurpose use and its increase in damage, stabilization, and range. The rifle was a result of meticulous engineering, designed to be lightweight and versatile. Its adaptive systems allowed for seamless transition between various ammunition types and firing modes, dexterously meeting the shifting demands of fluid combat scenarios. He also showcased the new orbital defense platform which could be used for planetary defense especially within the colonial systems. The platform featured a series of powerful MAC cannons, missile pods, and advanced shielding systems. It had been designed to operate as a stand-alone unit or integrate seamlessly with the planet's existing defense grid. To demonstrate its capabilities, Axel played a simulated invasion scenario, showing the Council how the platform could effectively track, engage, and neutralize targets at an unprecedented scale. And this discussion brought up the obvious question that everybody had on their minds. General Black was the first person to ask the question, how did you manage to create energy shielding, Admiral? When this question was asked, everybody focused their attention on Axel, waiting for his response. He wasn't keeping energy shielding a secret, especially with the Spartans having them in their own armor, so he explained it to the Security Council. I'd been studying energy manipulation for years, Axel began to make up a story, leaning against the table. I wanted to see if I could harness that raw power and use it to create a barrier. So, I started research on force field theories and began a series of trials. He placed the data chip into the table's integrated reader, bringing up numerous schematics on a holographic display. There was a moment of quiet as the Security Council members absorbed the models and data. Axel explained as his fingers traced over the projected diagrams. I utilized a highly advanced energy emitter to power the shield generator, he said, pointing to the designated component. The generator works by channeling energy through a sophisticated network of superconductive cables, creating an electrified barrier around the wearer or any structure it is installed on. And while I say electrified, it's not actually electrified, but it protects the structure from direct fire for a limited amount of time depending on the weapons used and how powerful they are. In addition, they can also recharge after they are depleted, but recharging will take time depending on the size of the item that the energy shield is protecting, added Axel. Axel let his words sink in, giving them a moment to chew on his explanation before continuing. The beauty of it is in its adaptability. We can scale up the generators for larger applications like our orbital platforms or scale down for personal armors like our Spartans. As for resources, he paused, looking at each member around the table. The cost is high when compared to traditional armor, but the benefits? Soldier survivability increases dramatically. The shield takes the hit, leaving our men and women unscathed. But because of the potential cost of applying an energy shield to each soldier, I would just use the new infantry armor instead if you actually go through with the implementation of it and leave the energy shielding to the Spartans because of their small numbers, explained Axel. There was a pause as the council members mulled over Axel's presentation, exchanging glances and scribbling down their own thoughts. Admiral Gardner was the first to speak. Admiral Woods, he started, his voice cutting clearly through the quiet room. These are indeed remarkable advancements. However, you know as well as I do that implementing these changes on a large scale will require significant resources. Not just financial, but operational too. Converting our existing systems will take time and manpower, said Admiral Gardner. He was originally angry that Axel had dared to present them with new designs for infantry armor when he strictly told him to focus on space warfare, but seeing these designs, they were innovative but also a waste of resources if they were to be implemented, since the current armor is already great and while the new armor has more benefits and costs the same as the previous armor, he was still hesitant to initiate and complete revamp of their forces because of the new armor's capabilities. But he could see the utilization of the ODST armor because it wouldn't change much. As for the infantry armor, it was just too much tech that the infantry would have to learn how to use. And it already takes time to train a single soldier, and implementing this would increase that time. I fully understand, Admiral Gardner, Axel replied with a respectful nod. However, I believe the long-term benefits, increased survivability, combat efficiency, and a stronger defensive network, outweigh the initial costs and challenges. The other members attending nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Admiral Gardner looked at Admiral Parangaski to get her opinion. Admiral Parangaski was a seasoned officer, her pragmatic approach often providing the perfect counterbalance to Axel's innovative but sometimes over-ambitious ideas. We'll need to run thorough field tests and simulations before we can even consider large-scale implementation, she suggested, adjusting her glasses. We need a proof of concept, Admiral Woods. Something more than just simulations. If your designs do hold up under real-world conditions, it will be substantial evidence in your favor. Of course, Admiral Parangaski, Axel acknowledged with a nod. Every innovation requires rigorous testing before it is deemed combat-ready. Gardner's gaze shifted back to Axel. Then you will perform the necessary field tests, and if they prove successful, then we will consider a more wide-scale implementation of them. As for the other technology, I want to see field tests with them as well. All the attending members nodded, agreeing to the proposition. And with that final decision the meeting had ended and Axel left the room. Though as he left, Admiral Parangaski was staring at him, wondering how she could use him in the future. While she didn't like his influence, he was a good tool for her to use within ONI. Meanwhile, Axel returned to his the Leviathan and left for Algal to prepare the necessary tests for all the new technology. He didn't bring up the new designs for the MCUs since he wasn't supposed to be working on them anymore. Chapter 34, Chapter 33. Over the following months, Axel tirelessly developed and tested his innovative technology in real-world scenarios. To assess the effectiveness of his new infantry armor, he enlisted a group of willing Marines to put it to the test. Similarly, a team of volunteers from the ODST were chosen to trial the newly designed ODST armor. The two armored teams were placed in a field test, with the objective of capturing the flag. The field test took place inside of the main research and development facility within the training grounds section of the facility. The field was a massive, biodome-shaped environment, housing various terrains that were strategically designed to mimic the harsh conditions of different planets. Tall hills and dense forests, wide open plains and intricate cave systems were all incorporated into the field. It was within this controlled chaos that Axel's new armor designs were to be tested. The Marines, outfitted in the new infantry armor, were placed at one end of the battlefield while the ODSTs, wearing the latest ODST suits, started from the opposite end. A single white flag was set on a hill among a patch of forest right in between both teams. With a stroke of a keyboard from Axel's control room overlooking the field, a loud horn echoed across the biodome announcing the commencement of the test. Both teams broke into fast-paced sprints towards their objective. The first interaction came at a ridge near the flag where an advanced scouting party from each group clashed. The Marines' new armor design held up impressively under fire from the ODSTs. In return, their counterattack displayed new offensive capabilities of their suits, firing high-velocity projectiles which proved devastating for the ODST scouting party. Of course they weren't using live ammo since they didn't want an accident to happen, but instead the damage was detected through the hit detection system of the suit. It wasn't something normally incorporated into the suits and was just for training purposes only. As the field test progressed, even more impressive aspects of the new armor designs revealed themselves. The ODSTs were agile, moving through the terrain like specters. Their suits had been tweaked to enhance stealth and speed, allowing them to silently eliminate some Marines and outmaneuver others. The Marines, on the other hand, held their ground with unwavering determination. The new infantry armor was robust and efficient in taking and holding positions. Advanced weapon systems integrated within the suit allowed them to deliver powerful counter-strikes against the attack. Eventually, after 4 hours had passed, the field test came to an end. The ODST had ended up capturing the flag and winning the game. At the end the two sides shook hands as a show of camaraderie and mutual respect between the two sides. But also they were excited about this new armor that proved to be much better than the standard armor. Axel and the engineers took down the data collected from the field tests and also jotted down the responses from the soldiers since they would be the ones wearing it and it was important to have their feedback on the new armor. In addition to the armor, Axel also created a single orbital defense station above Algal to test its capabilities. This would be the first time that he incorporated the energy shielding into a massive structure, but with the core located inside of the orbital defense station it was not too difficult. Though building the orbital defense station would take time and it would not be completed until March of 2525. In the meantime, Axel just spent time with Katherine and focused on developing new innovative technology to introduce once the war starts. He would also equip his battle group with energy shields since they were no longer a secret creation since the entire UNSC Security Council knows about them at this point. A/N, and just to clarify, I did misread the Halo wiki and saw that energy shielding was created later in the war after they captured and studied Covenant technology. But this had not effect on Axel creating the energy shields, so it shouldn't affect the story at all. Just wanted to clarify and point out my mistake. And so a few months had passed and now it was the year 2525. To be exact, it was February 3, 2525. Somewhere in the outer colonies a freighter under the UNSC Department of Commercial Shipping had exited slipspace due to a malfunction while transporting cargo from outer colony world Harvest to Madrigal. Not all ships have the warp drive at this point. Soon after exiting slipspace the freighter was discovered by an unknown ship of unknown origins. The unknown ship didn't waste any time and raided the freighter. And it didn't stop there, as a few hours later another ship was raided by the unknown ship and its crew. Thinking it was the insurrectionists, the Harvest Shipping Operations AI named SIF, had investigated the raids and reported them to an undercover ONI agent of Section 3, Gillian Alsigny. Within the same day as the attacks happened, Lieutenant Commander Gillian Alsigna devised a trap for the raiding parties, believing them to be insurrectionists' attacks. She lured them to an unmanned vessel above Harvest where Staff Sergeants Avery Johnson and Nolan Byrne, both of whom stationed at Harvest to train colonial militiamen, were to ambush the expected insurrectionists. Johnson and Byrne, armed with XBR-55s and outfitted with vacuum suits, moved into position but quickly saw that the boarders were not insurrectionists or human at all. "Ma'am, the boarders are not human at all, they are aliens," reported Johnson. Byrne looked at the 4 aliens in front of them in shock, since this was the first time that he had seen aliens. In fact, this was probably the first time any living human had seen them. "Staff Sergeants, you will continue with the plant and neutralize them, but try to capture one of them, and under no circumstances are you to allow any to escape," ordered Lieutenant Commander Gillian Alsigna. "Copy that, ma'am," said Johnson as he and Staff Sergeant Byrne moved into position. The pair of soldiers stealthily advanced, their suits dampening their footfalls. Weapons raised, they maintained a tight formation, covering one another as they moved to intercept the alien intruders. The ambush was swift and brutal. Johnson and Byrne burst from cover, letting loose with their XBR-55s. The rounds spat from the rifles, tearing into 2 of the alien intruders before they could react. However, the remaining 2 quickly recovered from their initial surprise, retaliating with blue bolts of energy that narrowly missed Johnson and scorched the metal wall behind him. "Damn it!" Johnson cursed as he took cover behind a bulkhead. In response to his outburst, Byrne let loose another volley from his rifle, temporarily forcing one of the aliens back, but in the process he injured by one of the aliens wielding some type of energy sword, a energy cutlass for reference. Johnston shot the third one, injuring it, and then ran to tend to Staff Sergeant Byrne injury. Once Byrne was stable, Johnson finished off the injured alien and ran after the last one, who attempted to retreat back to its ship. When Johnston caught up, the last one was interfacing with the ship, probably to try and leave, so Johnson didn't waste any time and shot the final one in the back. He didn't remain on the ship and had returned back to Staff Sergeant Byrne. Meanwhile, a few minutes after he left, the alien ship had self-destructed. The only surviving crew of the alien ship were only 2 aliens who managed to escape the ship on an escape pod before the ship exploded. Following this event, the UNSC High Command, after learning about this, attempted to make peace with the aliens, whom they learned were known as the Covenant. But negotiations failed during a meeting on Harvest when one of the Covenant attacked a member of the colonial militia, resulting in a gunfight. The Covenant retreated back to their ship and fled the planet. Days later, on February 11, the UNSC had lost all contact with Harvest, including Tierra, the space station orbiting the planet. Chapter 35, Chapter 34. "Quick, run to the transports!" yelled a soldier as his comrades sprinted towards the hangar of Tierra Station. A swarm of grunts from the Covenant Empire were hot on their trails, wielding deadly plasma weapons and firing relentlessly at the retreating soldiers. The soldier glanced over his shoulder, witnessing the horror of death and destruction wreaked by the Covenant. The sight, gruesome and heartrending, imbued him with a desperate strength. His legs pounded against the cold metal floor, his breath searing his lungs as he drew closer to the transport stationed at the far end of the hangar. Suddenly, a plasma shot seared through the air, narrowly missing him, but hit the soldier who was running just slightly ahead of him. Normally he would have stopped to check on the soldier, but close behind them were scary aliens trying to kill him with powerful weapons that tear through their armor. "Alpha Bravo! Man down!" he shouted into his helmet COMM, his gaze fixed on the Pelican. He could hear the rapid-fire blips of Covenant weapons growing ever closer. They were almost upon them. The Pelican's ramp was dropping now, revealing the armored silhouettes of reinforcements ready with their guns drawn. The sight spurred him forward, a newfound determination giving him strength. The fallen soldier was being dragged to safety by another who had bravely turned back for him. He felt a surge of relief mixed with dread. They were sitting ducks out there. Not daring to look back, he barreled up the ramp into the Pelican. Heat washed over him as plasma shots collided with the transport's armor. But the Pelican's armor couldn't be compared to that of a soldier's armor, which was not as thick or strong as the Pelican's armor. After a few moments, the soldier carrying his injured comrade had successfully boarded the Pelican as the ramp closed behind them. "Close call," said one of his comrades, slapping him on the shoulder. "Too close," he muttered in reply, his heart pounding fiercely against his ribs. But there was no time for respite, not when they were hurtling through space with an enemy fleet nipping at their heels. The fight was far from over. The cabin of the Pelican hummed with tension, the digital displays flickering, casting a synthetic glow over their grim faces. Outside, the stars were bright against the vast void of space, an obliviously tranquil backdrop to the chaos ensuing. Engine 2 is failing. We've sustained too much damage. Cried out the pilot from the cockpit. The soldier's heart hammered in his chest. It seemed their escape had been premature, they were still perilously glued to the crosshairs of a perilous fate. Can we get to the surface of the planet safely? He barked at the pilot. Once we break through the atmosphere of the planet we won't be able to land safely with just one engine, replied the pilot. The soldier looked back at his comrades as they were huddled around their injured teammate who was growing paler by the second. Medics were scrambling around trying to patch him up before they lost him. Another explosion sent them sprawling, their shouts muffled by the cry of failing engines and warnings blaring throughout the craft. We're losing him, pilot hold it stead, shouted a medic as they ran back to their injured teammate. I'll try, but... was the last thing the pilot said as the Pelican exploded. It was hit by plasma shot from the nearby Covenant cruiser. Back on Tierra Station, the Covenant had gained control of the station in preparation for its glassing of the planet. Freight containers carrying civilians and colonial militia went up the space elevator as the militia would try to take back the station, and the civilian containers would continue up the elevator, out into space where they would meet up with propulsion pods to carry the containers to safety. Staff Sergeant Johnson had led some men to try and take back the station and buy time for the civilians to escape the planet. Meanwhile on the Leviathan, Battle Group Tango was already traveling in warp speed towards Harvest upon receiving the news that the UNSC had lost contact with Harvest. Yvonne had intercepted this message sent to Admiral Gardner from Admiral Parangaski and reported it to Axel, who immediately alerted Admiral Gardner to what was really going on. 50 minutes before the Battle Group Tango entered warp speed, Axel was in his lab looking over the recent promotion of Commander Talia, who was now Captain Talia and was given transfer orders to command a frigate. As he was reading over her new transfer orders, his AI Yvonne had popped up next to him. Admiral, there was a message sent to Admiral Gardner regarding the loss of communications with Harvest, reported Yvonne. Axel knew what this meant and what was really going on, so he stood up from his desk in a hurry while shouting orders. Order everybody to report to their station immediately and send a message to the CENTCOM that the Covenant is attacking Harvest, which is why we lost communications with the planet, ordered Axel. Yvonne didn't question him and immediately sent the message while an emergency message started to play throughout the facility. Luckily most of the crew was already on board their respective ships while only a few mainly officers were within the facility. Axel had prepared for this moment and already had a plan in place. 5 KMCUs were already loaded into containers and transported towards the carrier. Axel and a bunch of officers got on board a Pelican and took off towards space. As the Pelican was traveling, one of the officers asked him what was going on. Is this a training exercise, Admiral? Because I don't remember seeing it on the schedule, asked a lieutenant. Axel looked at the officer with a serious expression. This is not a training exercise, Lieutenant. Harvest is under attack by aliens and we are going to assist them, stated Axel. Hearing this, the lieutenant had answered a lot of people's questions but also caused even more questions to pop into everyone's head. Once the Pelican landed in the hangar, Axel ordered Avia, the ship's onboard AI, to plot a course to Harvest and have the battle group line up to prepare to jump to warp speed. Many wanted to ask questions, but seeing his serious expression they didn't bother and just followed orders. It took a total of 30 minutes for all of this to happen. And they would be at warp for another 30 minutes. Before the left, Axel informed the battle group of their mission. Attention, Battle Group Tango, Axel's voice rang out over the communications network, cutting through the chatter like a knife. We are en route to Harvest. Our mission, to engage an alien force that has severed our communication lines with the planet. A sudden silence fell over the cabin as the news of their mission was absorbed. Faces paled and hands clenched into fists, but there was a steely determination in every pair of eyes that Axel saw. They were soldiers and they knew what they had signed up for. Make no mistake, Axel continued, his voice steady as he controlled his rising emotions. We are heading into an unknown situation against an enemy we know little about. But remember this, we are humanity's first line of defense. The people of Harvest are depending on us to bring them back from the brink. We won't let them down. He could see his words make an impact. There was a renewed glint in their eyes, their postures straightened with resolve. They were ready. Admiral, Avia flickered into existence beside Axel. He was looking at a holographic display glowing in the dim light of the bridge, a star map with Harvest at its center. We are nearing the end of our warp transit. The AI's voice held no hint of the tension that hung heavy in the air. Good, Axel said. We need to be ready for what's waiting for us there. As they neared Harvest, their communication channels crackled with distress signals. One particular message caught Axel's attention. A female voice resonating with fear and desperation cried out, this is Lieutenant Commander Jillian Alsigna to any civilian transport ship. Our freight container is floating in space without our propulsion pods. Requesting immediate assistance. On the other end a civilian replied, hang in there Lieutenant Commander, I'm swinging my freighter back in your direction and we will attach a tow cable to get you out of there, replied a civilian freighter pilot on the other end. Hold on, those fighters are turning in this direction on intercept course, shouted the pilot. Hearing this, Axel turned towards Avia. Calculate our trajectory once we drop out of warp. Plot an intercept course for their position and prep the fighters. Avia confirmed his orders and executed them immediately. I want all hands on deck as soon as we drop out of warp, Axel ordered, his voice echoing in the otherwise quiet bridge. Prepare for combat. All around him, crew members moved with renewed urgency, their fingers flying over holographic displays as they prepared for the coming battle. We're dropping out of warp now, Admiral, Avia reported, her holographic form flickering slightly due to the energy fluctuations caused by the transition from warp speed. The battle group dropped out of warp speed to see a flotilla of Covenant ships above Harvest. This is it, said Axel as he mentally prepared for the battle right in front of him. Chapter 36, Chapter 35. A/N, just for reference, Axel knows that the aliens are the Covenant, but he never told his crew nor the other officers the name of the aliens, which is why when speaking to the crew he refers to them as aliens, and out of dialogue I will refer to them as Covenant. The only time he called them the Covenant was when he told Yvonne to send a message to CENTCOM, who will know who the Covenant are because of the failed negotiations which happened in Chapter 33. Axel stood tall in the command deck, his gaze locked on the scene unraveling ahead. The normally peaceful skies of Harvest were swarmed with menacing Covenant ships. Engage defensive formation, he ordered crisply, his voice a contrast to the chaos happening outside of their ship. And dispatch fighters to aid that civilian freighter. Fingers danced over consoles as orders were relayed through the network of ships under Axel's command. Like a well-orchestrated dance, Battle Group Tango shifted formation. At first they didn't really believe that it was aliens attacking Harvest because they had never even heard about alien life until this moment. But seeing the strange ship and fighters attacking the civilian freighters, the crew knew that everything the Admiral said was true. Admiral, Avia said from her projected image at Axel's side. The warp jump seems to have alerted the alien-sized cruiser and it is turning this way. It's changing course to intercept. Axel's eyes focused on the alien cruiser, which changed its course to intercept his battle group. Luckily he had already ordered the battle group into defensive formation because now they have the ability to intercept the Covenant cruiser while the longswords engage the Covenant's fighters. We will meet them head-on, Axel declared, his words echoing throughout the command deck. Maintain formation and set an intercept course, and launch bombers for support. Silence hung thick in the air as his orders were processed. The ship groaned as it adjusted its vector under the strain of sudden acceleration. The crew didn't question Axel's judgment. They knew their admiral would not back down so easily, even when faced with such an unknown and formidable enemy. Prepare for combat, he ordered, his gaze fixed firmly on the looming Covenant cruiser. Target all available weapons on that cruiser, and ready the MAC cannons. Admiral, MAC cannons set to fire on your command, reported the weapons officer, tension lining his voice. Behind his calm exterior, Axel felt a flicker of apprehension. It was their first real engagement with an alien force, and the outcome was far from predictable. As the Leviathan and her fleet pushed forward, a formation of longsword bombers catapulted from their hangars and streaked toward the Covenant cruiser. Axel watched them shrink into specks against the vast backdrop of space, praying that they hit their mark. Seconds later, a blinding flash lit up the star-strewn vista as the bombers unleashed their payload. The cruiser's shield flickered from the bombardment, revealing to the crew that the cruiser had its own shields and that the bombardment failed. Fire MAC cannons, Axel commanded quietly. A low hum echoed through the ship as energy surged through massive conduits, building up to an unbearable crescendo. Then, with a silent flash of light that could outshine stars, 4 slug-like projectiles were ejected from the 2 destroyers' MAC cannons at relativistic speeds. They crossed the distance between the human fleet and the Covenant cruiser almost instantaneously. Explosions blossomed across the alien cruiser's hull as it rocked under the relentless assault. But the Covenant cruiser did not sit there as it fired its own plasma torpedoes at the battle group, hitting the 2 destroyers and the Halcyon cruiser. But the energy shielding on those ships had held. Admiral, the energy shield on the 2 destroyers is at 35% while the cruiser is at 50%, reported Avia. Axel smiled hearing this, since it meant that the energy shields could hold against the Covenant ships. But he wasn't one to doubt the Covenant, since they had more massive ships with more powerful weapons in their arsenal. In the distance the Covenant cruiser had exploded from the direct hits of the MAC rounds. The first 2 Mach rounds penetrated the shields of the cruiser, while the following Mach rounds hit crucial systems within the ship, causing it to explode. Axel paced around the command deck, watching as his crew worked with practiced efficiency even amidst crisis. His gaze returned to Harvest, visibly scarred now with flames and debris littering its once picturesque view. "We still have civilians out there," he murmured, almost to himself. "Sir," a communications officer called out from behind Axel. "We just received a distress call from a civilian freighter, they're heavily damaged and requesting urgent assistance." Axel spun on his heel to face the officer. "Send boarding parties and evacuate those civilians from the freighters and move into position to help with the evacuation of Harvest," commanded Axel, as he did not intend to remain here when more Covenant ships arrived. "Admiral, Tyera Station is still under the control of the alien forces. Shall we send boarding parties to take back the station?" asked Avia. "No, we shall not. It would be a waste of lives to retake the station when we are evacuating the planet," said Axel. Avia acknowledged his order. As the battle group moved into position to start the evacuation of Harvest, another battle group of UNSC ships had exited warp. "Admiral, incoming battle group identified as Battle Group Yankee," reported the communications officer, his eyes fixed on the blinking dots that popped up on their radar. "Send them the situation report. Also tell them to start evacuation of the southern hemisphere while we take care of the northern hemisphere," Axel ordered. The communication lines buzzed with activity as the 2 battle groups began their evacuation of the planet. Meanwhile, somewhere in another part of the universe within the Covenant's holy city, the High Prophet of Regret and the High Prophet of Truth were sitting in a room looking at the recent news. "We have lost contact with the cruiser designated as the Light of Conversion," a Covenant officer reported, his voice a mere hushed whisper within the ornate chamber of the High Prophets. The 2 prophets exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing in contemplation. "Dispatch a battle group to Harvest," the Prophet of Regret instructed, his voice echoing across the room adorned with symbols of religious significance. "We must exterminate those humans and reclaim our holy relics." Meanwhile, about 20 minutes later, back on Harvest, Axel watched as another wave of life pods shot towards the planet's surface, their bright trails illuminating the dark void like falling stars. His thoughts were interrupted when a new signature appeared on their long-range scanners. "Admiral. New contacts, and they aren't from us. Unknown ships inbound," warned Avia. "Order all fighters and bombers to return and protect our evacuation shuttles," Axel commanded. His eyes darted between various screens, studying the enemy's approach vectors. "All ships will maintain position and provide covering fire for our evacuees." The room echoed with affirmations as his crew jumped into action, dozens of orders sent through encrypted channels in an effort to prepare for another engagement. In space, a swarm of human starfighters burned their thrusters towards the inbound alien fleet. Trails of white-hot plasma crisscrossed over them as alien fighters swooped in to intercept, their movements unnatural and swift compared to the UNSC fighters. "Sir!" an officer called out over the deafening cacophony erupting from the countless surrounding consoles. "We've successfully established a defensive perimeter around the evacuation shuttle route. But our shields are at 45% and falling." Axel nodded, his gaze never leaving the radar. "Tell Battle Group Yankee to move in closer. We need all the firepower we can muster." The command deck hummed with activity as the human battle group repositioned itself, layering their ships into a tight formation. The distant Covenant fleet seemed to shimmer, akin to a mirage, as they started hurling plasma torpedoes towards the UNSC ships. The torpedoes streaked through the cold void of space, leaving behind a luminescent trail as they sped towards their targets. Axel watched as distant pinpricks of light turned into massive balls of energy hurtling towards his fleet. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying. "Brace for impact!" he shouted over the COMM. The ship shuddered violently as the plasma torpedoes made contact, illuminating the surrounding space with a brilliant flash. The shields held barely, but Axel could feel a knot tightening in his stomach. His gaze shifted to the fleet's status readings. The numbers were dropping too rapidly, the shields wouldn't hold for much longer. "Return fire!" he commanded. Another hum echoed through the Leviathan as it began to charge its Mach cannons once again. Other ships in Battle Group Tango followed suit, invisible energy pulsing through their massive frames in preparation for another counterattack. As if on cue, the hum reached its crescendo and a barrage of Mach rounds raced across the void, aimed squarely at the advancing Covenant fleet. Brilliant sparks of light erupted against the dark canvas of space as the rounds found their targets. But these were more powerful Covenant ships, leaving the Mach rounds to only destroy 2 of the ships. "I need those bombers back up in the air," Axel commanded urgently into his headset, watching as another wave of plasma torpedoes bore down on them. "Admiral, bombers are away," declared Avia. "Focus all fire on the leading alien capital ship," shouted Axel, his grip tightened around the armrests of his command chair. The Leviathan shuddered under him as more plasma torpedoes impacted against their shields. A silence fell over the command deck as they awaited the outcome of their desperate attack. Suddenly, a cheer erupted as the main screen displayed a bright explosion where the formidable Covenant ship used to be. The bombers had successfully hit some critical systems, crippling it and leaving it adrift. But also next to him one of the frigate's shields were down and it was hit by another volley of plasma torpedoes as it exploded, killing any remaining crew on board. "Admiral, there are lifeboats floating around where the frigate exploded," reported Avia. "Evacuate any survivors from the wreckage immediately," Axel ordered, "and get those damaged bombers back to safety." Avia swiftly relayed the orders. At the same time Avia just gotten good news. "Admiral, the evacuation is complete," reported Avia. Axel released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Good. Order all remaining ships to fall back and regroup at the rally point Alpha," said Axel as he sent the coordinates to the other ships. "Understood, Admiral," Avia responded, and immediately relayed the orders. "Admiral," called out Avia, "the last of our bombers are returning. They're heavily damaged but should make it back." "Good," said Axel as he breathed a sigh of relief. "Now order all UNSC ships to jump warp away." Avia quickly relayed his command, causing a flurry of activity in the command deck. Swiftly, one by one, the ships of Battle Group Tango and Yankee began to disappear, leaving behind the desolate battlefield filled with debris and echoes of a fierce conflict. Axel was the last to leave to ensure that all ships made it out of the system. Meanwhile, the Covenant forces regrouped and had prepared to glass the planet for any remaining humans. The Covenant may have won the battle, but Axel ensured that hundreds of thousands of people escaped before the Covenant could kill them. A/N, according to Halo, The Fall of Reach, Halo, Fall of Reach, Boot Camp, and Halo, The Essential Visual Guide, Harvest had a population of approximately 3 million. But also in the book Halo, Contact Harvest it is stated that Harvest had a Chapter 37, Chapter 36. Admiral Gardner addressed the members of the UNSC Security Council, stating firmly, "Let us begin. We have grave news to report." Admiral Gardner's words hung heavy in the air as he addressed the group. "As we all know, our negotiations with the Covenant on Harvest were not successful a few days ago," he stated somberly, and the rest of the members nodded solemnly as they recalled the details from the report. "Just a few hours ago we had lost contact with Harvest. I had received the message from Admiral Parangaski," said Admiral Gardner as all eyes had turned to Admiral Parangaski. Admiral Parangaski nodded as she began to explain. "After the failed negotiations on Harvest, the Covenant had retreated out of the system, or so we thought until we lost communications with them about 18 hours ago. I sent the message to Admiral Gardner since it seemed suspicious that after the recent events that we just lost communications with an entire colony," explained Admiral Parangaski as she continued. However, not even 30 minutes after sending the message, Admiral Woods contacted CENTCOM saying how it wasn't just a loss of communications but the Covenant were attacking Harvest. So CENTCOM sent Battle Group Yankee to investigate these claims but to also assist Admiral Woods if these claims of his were true. Gardner moved his gaze from Parangaski to the holographic star map in the center of the table. Harvest's location blinked ominously. "And Battle Group Yankee?" he asked, his voice steady despite the growing knot of unease in his stomach. Admiral Parangaski's expression softened as she responded, "Initially, we had no contact with them for several hours. However, approximately 4 hours ago, we received messages from both Battle Group Yankee and Admiral Woods' Battle Group Tango reporting that they were forced to evacuate the planet and retreat due to the Covenant's advanced weaponry and ships. The report indicates that all colonists were able to escape, but there were some casualties during the evacuation process. At this time, the exact number of survivors is unknown." The tension in the room rose noticeably, a ghostly fog of unease that latched onto every person present. The members of the UNSC Security Council were no strangers to conflict and disaster, but the scale of this recent event sent shudders through even the most hardened veterans. Their first contact with aliens and not even a month had passed and they were now at war with them. "So," Admiral Gardner said after a few painfully silent moments, "we can assume that the Covenant has declared war on humanity." The stark reality of his statement struck a chill into all present. Silence filled the room once more until Admiral Parangaski spoke up again. "We are certain of it. The scale of such an assault is a clear declaration of war. If this is the case, then we need to prepare a fleet to retake Harvest from the Covenant," announced the Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Jackson. General Black of the Marine Corps, General Stone of the Air Force, and General Graham of the Army all concurred with Admiral Jackson's statement. The aliens had initiated hostile actions towards them, leaving them with no choice but to retaliate in self-defense. "How long will it take to prepare a joint operation to retake Harvest?" asked Admiral Gardner to Admiral Jackson. "First we would have to get information on the battle between Battle Group Tango, Battle Group Yankee, and the Covenant fleet. Then by using that information we can get an idea of the enemy's fleet strength and send a sizable force to destroy the Covenant forces and retake Harvest," explained Admiral Jackson. Admiral Gardner nodded, hearing his answer. "All right, I'll contact Admiral Woods and ask him for the data on the battle. Once we have that I will be able to determine the exact time frame, but as of now we don't have any information on the enemy," added Admiral Jackson. "That's a good idea, Admiral Jackson, but also we need to decide on the rewards for the both Battle Group Tango and Battle Group Yankee, as they did just save an entire colony from falling into enemy hands. And Admiral Woods would need to be commended for his foresight," said Admiral Parangaski. Admiral Gardner nodded. "I agree, but we can't promote him yet, so what shall we do?" asked Admiral Gardner. General Black was the first to speak on this matter. "How about we issue letters of commendation for the admirals and their battle groups, and award medals to those involved?" "I agree with this proposal, as we can't openly give them a ceremony since I'm sure we want to keep this a secret from the public. As much as I would like to openly commend them for their efforts, we can't risk this going public," said General Graham. The other members agreed with this statement since they didn't think that this conflict was that big enough to announce to the public. They had just lost a single colony and they didn't want to risk panic spreading throughout Earth and the colonies. "All right, then it's settled. The Battle Group Tango and Battle Group Yankee will be commended and given medals for their efforts," announced Admiral Gardner. "Moreover, I am glad that you sent the message to Admiral Woods as well, since I would not have thought that the planet was under attack," said Admiral Gardner, talking to Admiral Parangaski. Admiral Parangaski scoffed at this statement. "I didn't send Admiral Woods anything." Admiral Gardner's eyebrows rose at this statement, knit together in confusion. "What? But you just said—" "I said," she interrupted, her icy gaze fixed firmly on him, "that I sent the message to you, Gardner. Not Woods." "So then how did he get the message?" asked Admiral Gardner. "He probably intercepted it as it was sent, something that I will speak with him about, but I am not surprised at this, since for someone like him intercepting high-priority messages is nothing. In fact he probably did it with an AI," explained Admiral Parangaski. Admiral Gardner's frown deepened. "That's a serious breach of security and protocol," he said. "I agree," Admiral Parangaski said firmly, "but let's not forget, his quick actions saved countless lives. It doesn't excuse it, but it does put it into perspective." General Stone chimed in, drumming his fingers on the table's surface. "In the meanwhile, we should increase our security measures to prevent any further unauthorized accesses from happening. I'll overlook his actions for now, but soon I will punish him for breaching the UNSC's security," stated Admiral Gardner. "Anyways, I believe we all have work to do and preparations to make," Admiral Gardner announced, standing. Everyone nodded in agreement, shuffling out of their seats and stepping away from the table. Admiral Gardner remained seated a moment longer, eyes tracing the holographic outline of Harvest, which was now lost to them. He didn't know how strong the Covenant were, but the UNSC would not back down from a fight. Meanwhile, back to Axel, who had already returned to Algal. Transports had already arrived to take the civilians to the inner colonies. Algal wasn't exactly a planet capable of taking in hundreds of thousands of people, so they were to be taken to the inner colonies where there was an abundance of space and food for them. Battle Group Yankee, led by Admiral Nicholas Holt, was undergoing repairs since they didn't have energy shielding like Axel's battle group did. They had lost 2 ships during the battle, while Axel had only lost a frigate. The other ships of Battle Group Yankee had plasma burn marks on their hulls, and some even had sections of the ship which were lost. Luckily they could seal off sections of the ship so that they could go to warp speed, because if not then they would have been stuck, since jumping at warp speed without sealing the open parts of the hull would cause the ship to completely break apart once they entered warp speed. It was also thanks to the improvements that Axel implemented with the warp drive. He made it so that ships built with a warp drive was also equipped with advanced ways to seal hull breaches in emergency situations. Axel, on the other hand, was looking through the data he got during the battle to analyze how powerful of a reactor he would have to make to be able to power the ship's energy shields. Just one hit from Covenant cruiser caused the ships to drop tremendously. They only survived because of the fast recharge rate of the energy shields. While he was busy with this, he was contacted by Admiral Jackson, commending him on his actions. "Your quick thinking and resilience under fire has resulted in saved lives, Admiral Woods," he said. "While the loss of Harvest stings, the fact that we managed to evacuate so many is a testament to your capabilities. Because of this, Battle Group Tango will be receiving a commendation and awarded medals for their actions. Thank you, Admiral, Axel responded. In the meantime, the reason I called you was to request the data on the battle so that we can organize a force to retake Harvest from the Covenant, requested Admiral Jackson. Of course, I'll send it right over, said Axel as he ordered Yvonne to send the data. After a few seconds, Admiral Jackson had received the data. Thank you, Admiral, this data will help us plan this future operation to take back Harvest. Now I have pressing matters to get to, and I'm sure you have things to do as well, so I will leave you to it, said Admiral Jackson as the holographic image of him disappeared. Axel continued studying the data in order to come up with ways to improve the energy shielding and to potentially find a way to counter the Covenant's plasma torpedoes. Creators' thoughts. Dr_Dread. Like it? Add to library. Have some idea about my story? Comment it and let me know. Comment. 17 comment. Vote. Chapter 38, Chapter 37. Axel and Battle Group Tango were bestowed with prestigious medals for their heroic efforts in the perilous evacuation of Harvest, a mission that saved the lives of approximately 300,000 souls from being at the mercy of the Covenant. Among Axel's numerous accolades were the Navy Distinguished Service Medal, Defense Distinguished Service Medal, and a coveted Gold Star. Each member of his crew, hailing from various branches of service, was also recognized for their gallantry, with honors such as the Legion of Merit, Marine Service Cross, Air Force Service Cross, Navy Service Cross, and more. Battle Group Yankee was also given their own medals and such for their contribution in the battle and efforts in evacuating Harvest. They were also the ones who took the most casualties because of their lack of energy shields, which had become a hot topic within the UNSC Security Council, as energy shields on ships proved its ability to save lives and preserve the ship. The grand ceremony, held in utmost secrecy on Algal, remained hidden from the public, a testament to the clandestine nature of their valiant endeavors. In this momentous occasion, every member of Battle Group Tango reveled in the privilege of serving under Axel's indomitable leadership, guiding them unerringly to triumph amidst the chaos of battle. For those newer recruits who had joined after Axel's earlier deployments to the outer colonies, they considered themselves lucky to be part of such a monumental undertaking. Though still relatively green, they had proven their mettle under fire from the Covenant, executing their duties with unwavering dedication. Amidst the jubilation of being decorated for his unwavering bravery, Axel received another momentous piece of news from Katherine: she was pregnant. While not entirely unexpected, this revelation filled Axel's heart with an overwhelming surge of joy and affection. Katherine, too, beamed with happiness as she witnessed the loving glimmer in Axel's eyes upon hearing her proclamation. Already content by Axel's earlier display of affection towards her, Katherine now found herself even more elated by the prospect of becoming a mother. Yet, intertwined with her joy was an undeniable curiosity about the sudden appearance of the Covenant. Throughout centuries, humanity had never encountered extraterrestrial beings, thus, the arrival of these hostile aliens was a profound and perplexing development. Unable to quell her inquisitive nature, Katherine couldn't help but ponder the stark dissimilarity between Covenant genetics and the composition of the human genome. The enigma of their existence ignited within her a desire to unravel the secrets behind this alien species and comprehend the implications it held for humanity's future. Meanwhile, Admiral Axel found himself grappling with a similar surge of curiosity, albeit with a more strategic focus rather than scientific inquiry. His mind was consumed by the pressing matters at hand, the meticulous preparations for future engagements, ensuring that every ship under his command was adequately equipped to deal with the relentless onslaught of the Covenant, and readying his crew for the arduous battles that lay ahead. Within the UNSC, military strategists pored over the data from the initial skirmish, desperately seeking patterns in the enemy's attack formations. Intelligence officers tirelessly worked to unravel fragments of the Covenant's communications intercepted during the chaotic fray. The UNSC Security Council remained resolute in their pursuit of comprehending the Covenant's tactics, communications, and weaponry, yearning to secure a triumphant victory in their next encounter. In the midst of this fervent quest for knowledge, Axel tirelessly labored to improve his battle group's armaments and defenses, drawing inspiration from the invaluable data gleaned during their first harrowing clash with the Covenant. Avia had meticulously scanned the Covenant vessels during the battle, unveiling an energy source unlike anything humanity had ever seen. To unlock its secrets and forge something even more formidable, Axel knew he had to disable a Covenant ship, board it, and get control of it to study its technology once the battle is over. If he could secure an intact vessel from the Covenant, he could delve deep into their technological marvels and birth his own iteration for the UNSC's advantage. In the meantime, Axel worked on his own projects. The UNSC Security Council had started implementing some of the technology that Axel had created, including the new Standard Infantry Armor, ODST armor, and energy shields for UNSC ships. Axel hadn't created the Mark II energy shields yet, so they had to use the current version, which was good enough to keep a ship alive in battle, but it could not take that many hits from Covenant weaponry. So for the next few months, that is exactly what he did. Through trial and error and multiple tests, Axel sought to create the improved energy shields before the next battle. Over these months, a massive UNSC fleet had assembled above Reach. Each ship was being retrofitted with a warp drive for those that didn't have it, and energy shields. Admiral Cole was selected to lead the fleet to retake Harvest, while Axel and Battle Group Tango was ordered to join the fleet when that time comes. As Axel delved deeper into his research and development efforts, the tension within the UNSC continued to mount. The data from the first battle showed just how superior the Covenant technology was compared to UNSC technology. Still, everybody worked tirelessly towards enhancing their defensive capabilities and strategic advantage. The UNSC Security Council used the excuse of a fleet overhaul project to explain the massive fleet gathering over Reach. Months had passed in a blur of activity and anticipation as Axel oversaw the integration of the new Mark II energy shields onto each ship in his battle group. The hum of machinery and the scent of metal filled the air as technicians worked around the clock to ensure that every vessel in the battle group was equipped with the latest advancements in energy shield technology. Finally, the day arrived when the UNSC fleet above Reach was fully prepared for the impending mission to retake Harvest. Axel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UNSC Leviathan, surrounded by his dedicated crew. They had been preparing for this next encounter with the Covenant over the past few months. With a deep breath, Axel gave the command for Battle Group Tango to join Admiral Cole's fleet in their journey towards victory. The thrum of engines reverberated through the ship as they set course, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in their quest to push back the Covenant threat and reclaim Harvest. As Battle Group Tango jumped to warp speed, Axel's mind was focused and resolute, his heart filled with unwavering resolve to defeat the Covenant in this second battle. While he never said it out loud, it was safe to say that thus far he had been steering the fate humanity towards one of victory, and he would stop at nothing to secure a future where humans prevailed against the Covenant. Once his battle group arrived, all ships had lined up with Admiral Cole's fleet and plotted their course for Harvest. And so, with courage in their hearts and determination in their souls, Axel and Admiral Cole's fleet went forth towards an uncertain but promising destiny, united in purpose and bound by duty to protect all that they held dear. Chapter 39, Chapter 38. John, Kelly's voice crackled through the COMM link, her words laced with urgency and determination. This is Kelly. We are swiftly closing in on Point Alpha. With every calculated step, Kelly led a group of Spartans through the dimly lit corridors, their armor glinting faintly in the subdued lighting. Each Spartan moved with a synchronized grace, their years of rigorous training evident in their fluid motions and unwavering focus. Roger that, Kelly, John responded, his voice steady and calm. As they moved deeper into the enemy stronghold, their surroundings grew increasingly ominous. The silence was interrupted by the sound of movement down the hallway. Kelly paused, her sharp eyes scanning the immediate vicinity for potential threats. Fan out, she commanded, her voice barely above a whisper. The Spartans immediately obeyed, dispersing throughout the hallway while maintaining their guarded formation. Their senses were heightened as they swiftly checked each door and corner for any sign of enemy activity. As Kelly neared the end of the corridor, a blinding light suddenly flooded the hallway. She skiddily took cover behind an archway. The familiar echo of enemy footsteps filled her ears as she gripped her weapon tighter. John's voice came through the COMM link once again. We're in position, he stated with unwavering determination. Ready when you are, Kelly. With a deep breath to steady herself, she responded without any hint of fear in her voice. Ready. The silence resumed its reign over the dark corridor as each Spartan prepared for what was to come. Now. John's urgent command crackled through the COMM link, cutting through the tension in the dim corridor. The Spartans surged ahead, weapons at the ready, their armor gleaming in the low light. A sudden burst of gunfire echoed down the hallway, bullets whizzing past Kelly as she ducked and weaved behind cover. The enemy was closing in fast, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. Take them out! Kelly shouted, her voice fierce and unwavering. The Spartans sprang into action, unleashing a barrage of return fire with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions rocked the corridor as grenades detonated, sending debris flying and shadows dancing on the walls. The air filled with the acrid scent of smoke and burning metal. John's voice cut through the chaos, cool and collected. Keep moving. With a nod of determination, Kelly signaled for the final assault. The Spartans charged forward as one, their movements synchronized and deadly. Each shot fired was precise, each blow landed with calculated force. In a whirlwind of violence and speed, the enemy fell before them, no match for the relentless onslaught of the Spartans. Victory was swift and brutal, leaving only silence in its wake as they moved on to their next objective. Objective in sight, Kelly reported, her eyes locked onto the massive steel door at the end of the corridor. Preparing to breach. Copy, Kelly. Coming up on your 6, said John as he and his team of Spartans approached from where Kelly and her team had just cleared a path. Ready? John queried, stepping up beside Kelly, his large frame dwarfing her slender form. Kelly gave a firm nod, her fiery determination unbroken. Always, she replied simply. With a wave of her hand, 2 Spartans came forward, placing explosive charges on the hefty steel door. They quickly retreated back to cover, their steps falling in sync with each other's. Breach in 3, 2, 1. Kelly's voice was steady and calm. A deafening blast echoed through the corridor as the charges detonated, tearing open a gaping hole in the steel door. Hot fragments of twisted metal flew in all directions, clanging against nearby walls or ricocheting harmlessly off their sturdy armor. No time to lose, Kelly commanded as she led her Spartans through the smoking breach. Eyes open and heads down. Inside, red emergency lights pulsed ominously against the stark metallic surfaces of a command center. Multiple enemy combatants were stunned by the explosive entrance. Yet others began to regain their footing and rallied in an effort to defend their stronghold. Engage. John's order surged through the COMM link, sparking another round of precision chaos. Kelly was unstoppable as she waded into the fray, her weapon roaring with deadly intent. Her team followed suit, moving like predators among prey, silent but for their weapons' deadly song. One by one, the defenders were cut down, their feeble attempts at retaliation drowned in the thunderous symphony of gunfire and explosions. Clear! Came the call from Kelly, her voice resounding with triumphant determination. Around her, the remnants of the enemy laid strewn across the cold metal floor, their last stand crushed beneath the might of the Spartans. Hold position, John commanded as he approached a large console near the back of the room. His hands moved swiftly over the complex array of buttons and switches, his eyes scanning multiple data streams simultaneously. Kelly watched as John worked to get the information on the whereabouts of other insurrectionists' bases, their primary mission objective all along. Got it, John announced a few minutes later. His fingers sped over the console one last time before he secured a small data chip. He turned to face Kelly, holding it up for her to see. Mission accomplished. Kelly nodded, seeing the data chip in John's hand. Let's move out, he ordered, already setting coordinates for extraction on his personal COMM link. As one, they filed out of the command center, leaving behind nothing but destruction and silence in their wake. Their footsteps echoed in unison against metal flooring and then faded away as they disappeared into darkness. After a few minutes they had arrived at a breach in the facility where a Pelican was waiting. Each Spartan boarded the Pelican and took their seats. Once every Spartan was inside, the doors closed and the Pelican returned to the nearby Halcyon light cruiser. Meanwhile, near Harvest, Admiral Cole's fleet had exited warp speed within the system. Immediately upon exiting warp, the fleet of 40 UNSC ships had encountered a Covenant fleet numbering 20 vessels. And one of those ships was massive in size compared to what the UNSC has seen before. To Axel, he knew that this was one of the Covenant's super destroyers, which would prove to be a problem for the UNSC fleet because of its firepower and its defenses. The other ships in the Covenant fleet consisted of destroyers, cruisers, corvettes, and frigates. And they had already started to turn towards the UNSC fleet, so Admiral Cole ordered the fleet to engage. As the UNSC ships began their assault, the sky lit up with fiery streaks of weaponry, illuminating the darkness of space. The Covenant fleet responded in kind, and soon the celestial battlefield was ablaze with plasma and missile trails. Target their engines, Admiral Cole barked into his COMM link. We need to take out that super destroyer. In response, a volley of Archer missiles away from the UNSC ships, racing towards the massive alien vessel. A brilliant flash marked their impact, but the super destroyer remained intact, its shields shimmering as they absorbed the brunt of the attack. Shields are holding, came the report from one of the ship's officers. Then we need to hit them harder. Cole replied fiercely. Understood, sir, Axel responded. He was aboard the UNSC Leviathan, preparing for his own assault. He commanded his crew to load up their own arsenal of missiles and heavy artillery. This was the chance for him to show off the new autocannons which was created as a counter to the Covenant's powerful plasma weaponry. All hands, prepare to engage that Covenant ship. Axel ordered over the ship's intercom. The Leviathan, a monstrous behemoth of steel and weaponry, surged forward, its powerful engines propelling it straight towards the Covenant fleet. Fire all cannons! He commanded. The ship shuddered as the new autocannons discharged their deadly payload. An array of devastating energy projectiles hurtled through the void, glowing white-hot against the backdrop of stars and distant planets. The super-destroyer's shielding flickered under the hailstorm of energy rounds but held on doggedly. Yet, a few hits managed to find their way past the shield. Direct hit! An officer shouted over the din. Their shields are starting to buckle. Axel didn't waste any time in capitalizing upon this advantage. All ships, he broadcasted to the fleet, focus fire on the super-destroyer. It's faltering. Almost simultaneously, dozens of UNSC vessels converged their fire on the alien behemoth. The super-destroyer's shields flickered and warped under the relentless assault, but they didn't give in. Launch everything we got! Axel ordered with stern resolution etched across his face. On his command, a barrage of archer missiles and autocannons tore through space towards the behemoth. For a moment, it seemed as if time stood still, then came another bright flash as countless detonations lit up its shields. This time though, the super-destroyer wasn't able to hold on. Its shields buckled and failed beneath the onslaught of archer missiles and autocannon fire. Unspeakable devastation was wrought upon its hull in an instant. The super-destroyer shields had failed and now it was vulnerable to the concentrated power of the UNSC fleet. Its hulking form was engulfed in a storm of explosions, each one tearing through its once invincible hull. Fires blazed across its surface as internal systems were ruptured and destroyed. Keep firing, don't let up. Admiral Cole's voice filled Axel's ear, his determined command driving the assault forward. The super-destroyer reeled under the unyielding barrage. Another volley of archer missiles left the firing tubes of the UNSC ships, their fiery trails slashing across space to collide with the staggering behemoth. The super-destroyer shuddered violently with each successive impact, each explosion further compromising its integrity. The energy shields held of the counter-attack by the Covenant fleet, allowing the UNSC fleet take the direct hits from the smaller ships. But it came at a cost, as they had already lost 8 ships to the Covenant fleet while they were only focusing on the super-destroyer at this time. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Axel ordered, his eyes never leaving the screen that displayed the deteriorating super-destroyer. He knew well enough that desperate enemies were dangerous ones. The crew obeyed immediately, bracing themselves for violent shifts in momentum as the Leviathan moved to dodge retaliatory fire from the Covenant fleet. The enemy is returning fire, one of his officers reported, her voice calm despite the chaotic scene playing out before them. But Axel's focus remained solely on the super-destroyer. Maintain fire! He bellowed above the clamor of battle noise filling the bridge. Suddenly, a bright light emanated from within the super-destroyer. It quickly grew brighter and larger until it consumed the entire vessel and then some. The light was blinding, forcing Axel and the crew to shield their eyes. The bridge's main screen automatically dimmed to protect the sensors from the overwhelming luminescence. The silence that followed was eerie, only broken by the soft hum of the ship's systems and the labored breathing of its occupants. Then came the shockwave. It hit like a supernova, powerful enough to shake the entire UNSC fleet. The force of the blast threw unsecured crew members off their feet, and alarms began to blare throughout the ship, echoing hauntingly in the stunned silence that followed. Slowly, Axel opened his eyes. The tactical display was a mess of static and disjointed outlines, their sensors struggling to regain footing after being blinded by the explosion. Despite this, one thing was clear: where there had once been a formidable Covenant super-destroyer, there was now nothing but a field of debris. We did it! One officer spoke up incredulously, his voice barely more than a whisper. We took down the super-destroyer. Don't get distracted, now all ships focus fire on the remaining Covenant fleet, ordered Axel. His voice carried across the frenzied bridge, a bastion of authority amidst the chaos. The officers obeyed immediately, their focus shifting from the obliterated super-destroyer to the remaining Covenant ships. Tell all ships to maintain offensive maneuvers, Axel ordered, his eyes scanning over the tactical display. On it, sir. His communications officer replied, swiftly disseminating his orders across the fleet. The Leviathan shook violently as it clashed with the remaining Covenant vessels. Its autocannons roared to life once more, sending a barrage of energy rounds towards the enemy. It appeared as though the Covenant had figured out which UNSC ships posed the most threat and they had started targeting the Leviathan. While the Leviathan was a carrier in name, Axel had retrofitted to be able to stand its ground. Admiral Cole observed in awe as the Leviathan assertively led the battle and motivated the other UNSC ships to keep fighting. Throughout his career, he had never witnessed a carrier taking on such a frontline role, but there it was, happening right before his eyes. With the super destroyer gone, the UNSC fleet led by Admiral Cole managed to win the battle and cause the Covenant to flee. Out of the 20 Covenant ships, only 5 were able to escape, while on the UNSC side 12 ships were lost during the engagement. To Axel these numbers were disappointing as he felt that they could have been reduced to single digits and more lives could have been saved. But this was the price to pay in war and it was something that he would see time and time again. Chapter 40, Chapter 39. After the battle was won, Admiral Cole had ordered a search for any survivors of the lost UNSC ships. After that he finally turned his attention to Harvest. What he expected to see was its lush green continents and blue oceans. But instead, what he saw was something completely different. Harvest now looked like a frozen tundra that was incapable of sustaining life. This was the same reaction for the other UNSC ships who saw the planet. Before they were so preoccupied with the battle that they didn't get a chance to really look at Harvest and notice the difference. Admiral, orbital scans show that the Covenant conducted a plasma bombardment of the planet. Any structure or agriculture that was once on the planet is now just a pile of rubble, reported the ship's AI Seekmet. I am also picking up Covenant activity on the surface of the planet. There's still Covenant activity on the planet, said Admiral Cole to himself. They came back here to take back Harvest and they were still far from their goal. Seekmet, tell Major Harris to prepare his Marines for landing. We will land away from where the Covenant activity is concentrated and set up forward operating bases. From there we will start eradicating the Covenant presence on the surface. And have the Spartans deploy with the troops as well. Ordered Admiral Cole. Yes, Admiral, Seekmet responded, her digital voice echoing in the control room. The AI figure flickered like a mirage on the holographic display, casting an ethereal glow on the weathered faces of the Admiral and his crew. Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready for landing procedures in no time, Major Harris's voice crackled through the intercom, a sign of determination in his tone. From his vantage point on the bridge, Admiral Cole watched as the UNSC ships began their descent towards Harvest. The once lush planet was now a barren wasteland, cloaked in a veil of ice and snow. It was a chilling sight, but they had a mission to complete. Seekmet, Admiral Cole's voice was steady as steel. Coordinate with the ground teams. I want updated reports on Covenant movement every half hour. Yes, Admiral, Seekmet replied crisply, her holographic form shimmering as she disappeared momentarily to carry out her orders. The minutes ticked by slowly as the fleets descended towards the frozen tundra. Occasionally, Seekmet would appear with updates on Covenant activity and Major Harris would respond with adjustments to their landing strategy accordingly. Major Harris had found an ideal spot to establish a base, and he wasted no time setting up landing areas for Pelicans and other aircraft to land. Long swords flew around the planet and would get caught in dogfights with the Covenant's own Banshees. Slowly but surely, the UNSC forces began to stake their claim on the alien-infested land. Tents sprang up, temporary shelters against the harsh landscape. Seekmet, he called again, his gaze riveted on the holographic display showcasing the ground operation. Get me an update on Major Harris and his men. On it, Admiral, Seekmet responded promptly. Her image flickered as she accessed the data feeds from the landing zone. Meanwhile, as if to mock their progress, a particularly fierce gust of wind swept across the icy wilderness, carrying with it a flurry of snowflakes. The once peaceful Harvest now seemed like an alien world, hostile and uninviting. As the flurry subsided, Cole's attention was drawn back to Seekmet, who had returned with the requested update. Major Harris reports successful establishment of a base camp, Admiral. No casualties reported thus far. Good. Keep monitoring all activities closely, he commanded. And update me on our air supremacy. Affirmative, Admiral, Seekmet began. Our longswords are holding their own against the Covenant Banshees. Their superior maneuverability is giving them an edge in these dogfights. The Admiral nodded approvingly as he continued to survey Harvest's surface from above. The harsh reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. This wasn't going to be easy or quick. Continue efforts on all fronts, he ordered, his voice echoing throughout the command center. And get Admiral Woods on the COMM link for me, ordered Admiral Cole. Yes, Admiral, Seekmet complied, her holographic form flickering as she worked swiftly. After a moment, Axel appeared on the screen. "Admiral Woods," Cole greeted, his stern eyes meeting Axel's holographically projected ones. "I trust you've been updated about the situation on Harvest." "In detail, Admiral," Axel replied. "It seems like an orbital bombardment of sorts. They've even left some of their forces behind," Cole added grimly. "We've begun landing procedures and have established a base camp. Major Harris is leading the ground effort." "I'm not surprised they're maintaining a presence," Axel noted, his face tight with concern. "The planet was a significant resource for us, they could be scavenging or looking for something specific." "We'll determine that soon enough," Cole declared firmly. "For now, our focus is on eliminating any Covenant activity and securing the planet's surface. That's why I contacted you. I hope that you can deploy some MCUs to the surface to assist our Marines in the battle," requested Admiral Cole. He was one of the people who knew about the abilities of the MCUs and hoped to utilize them to limit casualties. "I'll send 2,000 MCUs down to assist Major Harris, while I have other matters to attend to on the surface," stated Axel. "Thank you, this will be a valuable addition to our forces. I'll inform Major Harris about the reinforcements and won't question your decision to deploy to the surface. Just make sure to stay safe and come back alive," Admiral Cole said gravely, fixing his gaze on Axel. "I have a sense that this war is far from over and we need individuals like you to lead the way for humanity." "Of course, Admiral, I'll take extra precaution," said Axel as the screen turned off. Admiral Cole was questioning in his mind why an admiral would need to deploy to the surface, but then he thought about how Axel was not a normal admiral. He held considerable power and influence because of his inventions, and he also because of the recent creation of energy shields which has saved hundreds if not thousands of lives during the battle. He was also head of Section 3, which brought on more responsibilities that Axel had to take care of. Admiral Cole also trusted Axel to make the right decisions. Meanwhile on the UNSC Leviathan, Axel was preparing for his descent to the planet. Their destination would be an ancient underground Forerunner facility located somewhere in the northern polar region of Harvest. If Axel remembered correctly, it contained a star map of nearby star systems and one of those star systems had a Forerunner shield world in it with some useful information that Axel could use. Accompanying him would be a detachment of MCUs, Marines, and Spartan Team Omega. Long swords would escort them towards the location alongside a few Falcons. Axel wanted to set up a defensive position once they arrive so that Axel can have time to research and study the Forerunner structure. If possible, he hoped to find a lot of information relating to Flood and other advanced Forerunner technology. Axel put on his own armor and made his way to the hangar where he boarded a Pelican. Along the way his appearance surprised some of the crew, but they remained professional and saluted him as he passed. "Godspeed, Admiral," one of the crew members murmured as Axel climbed aboard the Pelican. Once everyone was on board their respective Pelican, the pilot acknowledged him with a nod as the engine roared to life, lifting them off the deck of the hangar and heading out into the snowy landscape of Harvest. The long swords fell in alongside them, maintaining an escort formation as they too took to the darkness of space.
Thanks for listening.